Streaming, 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 streaming. It's streaming time. Here we go, we're streaming good. Here we go, we're streaming like a good boy should. Hey guys, how you doing today? Just starting up the live stream here. People are going to come flooding in by the thousands at any moment. Kind of a rainy, gloomy day today. I got my puppy back. He spends usually a week with my ex, and now he's back at my place. So you'll be seeing him shortly as he gets up and starts moving around, because he'll be like, "John, why are you talking? Who are you talking to? You must be talking to me. I'm the goodest boy. You can talk to me." So stick around if you'd like to see an adorable pug. I think the big story, and I'll probably be doing a story on it tomorrow for one of my shorter videos, is the Fairy Creek story. So basically there's a clash between protesters and police officers, and journalists are being denied entry, and it's all over logging in British Columbia's old-growth forests. That the logging industry has been logging in these old-growth forests under the presumption that, trees, right? Trees are a natural resource. Hey, John, how you doing? Thanks for popping in. Yep, perfect day for a live stream. Yeah, I doubt anybody will be going out today, so perfect opportunity to pop on and say hi. I'm talking about the Fairy Creek situation, about how there is logging happening in British Columbia, and what the science is showing is that these old-growth forests, if you log them, they don't grow back, right? That the trees, that if a tree is like these ancient old trees, well, those ancient old trees don't just come back, right? Like it is like its own biodiversity that the tree and the trees carry with them. And if you clear cut them, then you fundamentally alter the biodiversity of that forest, and they don't come back. And so you're having a lot of protesters who are protesting against the logging industry, and also, incidentally, have, at least in terms of narrative, in terms of placation, let's say, they have the government's support, that the British Columbia government has gone in and said to everyone, we are going to stop these logging practices in these old-growth forests. And of course, the British Columbia government has done nothing of the sort and has actually not moved in that direction because capitalism, it's a failed system that doesn't work, that will exploit everything to exhaustion and collapse. And and what's troubling to me in all of this is that you have protesters clashing with RCMP officers, sometimes on First Nations soil, where a lot of this is actually happening. And journalists are being denied entry, and here's a clip.
Back up until you're told to.
Oh, guys, we're trying to work with you guys. Work with us, okay? We're trying to make it safe, and we don't have control. And
Come on. We're not going to interfere with what you're doing. We know how to do it safe.
Sorry. When they're ready.
Two questions. One.
Yeah.
You say make it safe. Can you
Okay. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't question and answers, guys. Come on.
Come on, you guys.
Back up, please. Back up. Let's go.
Yeah,
Back up.
So when you
Back
say you're
up.
gonna make it safe,
Yes. So
Back up.
We're right now, we'd like to do
Talk
that,
to your
but
supervisor.
unfortunately,
Back up.
we're here right now trying to make sure that
Start
you guys
this.
don't
we've been
Back
here
up.
like an hour and a half more. So
Back
can you
up.
tell me a little bit about what the issue is?
We're not going to be commenting on it. It's simple. You guys can back up to that vehicle right now.
Not backing up.
Until told further.
Can
Okay.
you
Not
give me a
backing
reason
up.
why?
That's it. Because it's not safe.
Can you give me a reason?
No,
why?
I'm
Come
not
on.
going to elaborate on that.
Come on,
This
you
isn't a
guys.
negotiation. Okay, let's go. Back up,
I'm actually
please.
just looking for
Back
information,
up.
not to negotiate.
No, and I can appreciate that. We want to give you information, but right now we can't, okay? So we're going to provide you with information when it's safe to do so.
Come on.
Okay,
And then
so
they
just let
will
us please do our
further.
job.
We are.
Okay.
I mean, for
So
a
please-
solid
please-
hour and a half or more, we've been waiting
Yeah.
to move
Yeah.
slowly.
Come
up the
Okay,
road.
and it's going to be another
Sometimes it
few
takes
minutes.
longer.
It's
Okay.
going to be another
You
few
guys know
minutes.
that, right? Sometimes it takes a long
Look,
time.
there's a space up there to the
No,
left where we can
it's not
safely observe
happening.
this. Okay?
Go. Go. It's not happening. Or you will be arrested. Okay? Don't put this in my face. You will be arrested if you do not comply. Continue
Comply
on.
with what?
With what I'm telling you. Because
Okay,
you
under
are
what
granted
authority?
access into an
No, this
exclusion
isn't-
zone right
this
now.
is,
Go.
this is
back
Carl,
up.
man.
Do you want to be back? Do you want to be arrested? You
No.
will be arrested.
Yes.
Go.
We need to hear.
Okay, just stop, man. Come on. Have some professionalism.
You guys have some professionalism.
We
We're
do.
professional reporters.
No, you're
There's
trying-
no safety issue here.
There
We
is.
know there isn't, okay?
There is.
So we're gonna move back to my vehicle.
So, hi Ruth, hi Braden, thanks for coming in. That was a clip that's being done at the quote-unquote exclusion zone, as you heard them call it, in Fairy Creek. They don't want journalists in to see what's happening. It's really, really simple. And that tells me that the situation is probably much worse than anyone is reporting or is talking about. They're not letting people go in. Hey Nick, how you doing? Thanks for popping in, bud. We're talking about Fairy Creek. We're talking about the situation at Fairy Creek where the police officers there are preventing reporters from going in during a standoff between protesters, likely First Nations protesters, because a lot of this is happening on First Nations land, between those protesters and logging companies in British Columbia's old growth forests. The current the current BC. Oh, it is British Columbia. I was going to say British Columbia, and then I got lost while saying British Columbia, and I thought British. That's a stupid thing to say, and now I'm an idiot, and I'm in this conversation. So, the British Columbian NDP were elected, and one of their major planks was to stop this old growth forestry, right? That was one of the things that they were talking about pretty openly and pretty clearly. They have not done that. They have continued to move forward with old growth forestry. They've continued to do this sort of stuff. And so now there are protests happening at a place at the site itself. And let's Fairy Creek. Any excuse whatsoever to bring up any map whatsoever. You guys know me if you come in anytime. So Fairy Creek, it's even got a link now on Facebook itself, right? Like, so this is happening on Vancouver Island, southern Vancouver Island, right? That road that we were saying was probably this one right here, where they're trying to get in to see what's going on, and we have seen footage of protesters being removed from that area. The one that I saw was footage of them. It was several police officers holding a tarp, and there's actually a fellow in the tarp, and they were pulling him out. It's old growth logging, near as I understand. It could be both. Honestly, the whole thing is become like one sort of issue, and to me, the thing that's scary about this story is that journalists are not being permitted entrance. That's where I sort of like draw the line and say you're not letting independent sources go in and verify what's happening in that region. Yeah, I mean, drones would be one way of doing it. Journalists have a long history of kind of going around and subverting this sort of stuff. It's very unlikely that this sort of journalists not being able to go in will be maintained for very long, and it's one of those stories that I think, yeah, when humans can't breathe because there are not enough trees, everyone will care. Yeah, bit late then. Yeah, who owns what? Where's the money? Lumber prices are crazy. Yeah, the whole industry is kind of nuts, and like we are getting into a period of time where like there is going to come a period of time where we're going to have to start looking at one another and start saying like, do we really need to keep like building all of this stuff? Do we? Hey Brandon, how you doing? Oh, I didn't even say hi, Ward. I just sort of like assumed you'd be here, Ward. Yeah, it's a dreary day. Lots of people popping in this time. That's nice. Yeah, so I think the landing point on Fairy Creek is they got to let those journalists in, but what they'll find, and we know this is the truth because this is the history of Canada, right? What they'll find is they'll find the RCMP protecting corporate interests and suppressing First Nations people. That's what they'll find. Yeah, only when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish been caught, and the last stream poisoned will we realize we cannot eat money. Yeah, because money's not real, Nick. Like, money is an abstraction. It's a tool that we have, instead of treating as a tool, we have decided to venerate and worship. That we've replaced the concept of God with money. And we worship money. And if you have money, you're good. And if you don't have money, you're evil. And it's an idiotic ideology that needs to go away. Insulin has become so expensive that as many as 1 in 4 people with diabetes are now skipping life-saving doses. Yeah, insulin manufacturers murder diabetics with price gouging. Fix the headline for you. Yeah, basically every headline that comes out of corporate capitalism now needs to be fixed like this. And most of the corporate capitalist news sources are actually declining steadily in viewership because they refuse to actually report on stories in a way that makes any sense to anybody. Oh, that's a great question, Ward. Fairy Creek Logging Company. Yeah, let's get real specific. Teal Jones? I mean, the only reason they'd be talking about it, right? Forestry company Teal Jones speaking out. So established back in 1955, so like 60 years ago, they said, yeah, we'll begin doing stuff. So new information has come out since then. Yeah. Over 70% of the province's old growth protected. I mean, that's cute. Like, it's cute to say that, but like, you know, capitalist companies like this are not gonna abide by that kind of stuff. And of course, like a capitalist company is going to say whatever it needs to say to sort of put as many people asleep. Yeah. As Teal Jones points out, it's only a small section of the valley, but it's an intact valley. And when you log a small section of an intact valley, it's no longer intact. Beyond that, we shouldn't be logging old growth forests, period. Well, and yeah, obviously Teal Jones says the wood is easier to work with. Of course it is, because the trees are this big, right? Like, you get so much wood out of a single one of these trees. Yeah, and of course, the industry adds $32 billion to the GDP of the province. Like, my thinking, like, this is where I kind of land on this, which is like, we could, if you removed your arm, you could sell the meat to a butcher, and you could sell the bones, right, to, you know, for tool making or any kind of thing, and then you'd get the money, and that would increase your GDP and your economic strength in the world. All it would cost you is your arm, right? That's kind of the analogy I use about this. And that's kind of the corporate way of thinking, right? Like, but look how much money we're making after we remove your limb. There's a sand shortage. The sand for concrete and glass is on the bottom of the ocean, and they are finding it harder to find it. Yet, who here in the chat thinks that we are actually going to, like, encounter the Dark Lord Cthulhu? That, like, the Dark Lord Cthulhu is actually going to come out from the bottom of the ocean, which we refuse to explore in any meaningful way, which we refuse to actually, like, know anything about in any kind of significant way. There was a squid that washed up on the shores of Japan, and they did some studying on it. And the thing's enormous. Like, it's the size of like a super yacht, right? And they researched it, and they concluded that they think that it was a young one, a child, right, that washed up on their shores. And so that implies the existence of, like, giant super squids. So I suspect at some point, like, these super squids are going to be like, these humans are pissing me off, and they're going to surface and start smashing things, and then we'll nuke them, because we're smart that way. No, but the next few generations will experience a new human dark age if we keep going in the capitalist direction we are. Nick, who's to say we're not in the dark age now? Right? Like, who's to say that that hasn't happened already? Like, did the people who were living through the dark age know that they were in a dark age? Were they sitting around being like, man, this age is super dark? Or do you think they were just living their lives, kind of walking around? Like, we are... I mean, it's going to get worse because America is going to go into a significant decline and is going to really isolate itself on the world stage and could even start acting really dramatically with its, nuclear stockpile and massive military, right? It could really do some increasingly dramatic things in its desperation to maintain its superiority. And, like, you see how idiotic these white supremacists are, right? Like, we all see how idiotic these white supremacists are. Well, the ones in power who act all nicely and diplomatically, they're not much smarter. And when push comes to shove, they're going to do some really stupid stuff. Because we can access information at the touch of our fingers still, in the first world, maybe the global south, you have a good point. I mean... I feel like you kind of talked yourself towards that one, Nick. That's always fun to see. It's and remember, like, the access of information that we have, like, the strategy by the CIA currently is obfuscation, right? That they know that if they were to do something like shut the internet down, that would that by itself would cause a revolution, right? That by itself would make too many people aware of who the villain of the story is. And so the goal now is let people have as much information as they want. In fact, we'll let people have an overabundance of information. And in fact, we'll actually erect entire other institutions to obfuscate the narrative as much as possible. So people will simply not know what to think, right? And so when you are looking at this sort of abundance of accessibility that we have in terms of communication and information, that and saying, well, of course we can't be in like this sort of dark age because look how much information and stuff we have. And my response is, well, okay, but nobody knows what's going on, right? And the people who have power want to ensure that that's the case. They're never going to like tell you the stories that actually matter. They're never going to talk about BlackRock or Vanguard, what JP Morgan is doing, right? Or the Rockefellers or the Rothwells, right? They don't talk about that in any significant, meaningful way. Unless it's to sort of obfuscate and sort of create so many different narratives that nobody knows what to believe or what's going on, right? And I mean, if that's not a dark age, I don't know what is, right? Just a period of mass confusion perpetrated purposefully by massive intelligence organizations to maintain power and control, right? Of an oligarchy, no less. Like, sounds pretty dark agey to me. Like, and I mean, the very fact that my channel is growing, the very fact that communism and socialism are starting to gain steam, and I think really gives proof to this kind of waking up of the North American populace, this sort of realization that we know we've been sold a bill of goods. We just don't know what to do about it. Or if we do know what to do about it, we don't have the energy or will to do it. Like we haven't got there quite yet. I'm referring increasingly to philosophers and intellectuals from yesteryear. Well, and another thing that's really starting to happen, I'm seeing more and more significantly, is intellectuals and philosophers who came from places we used to ignore, right? Like nobody really pays that much attention to Chekhov here in the West, right? But if you go and actually read or watch any of his plays, you'll find a very strong environmental messages, very strong socialist and communist messages. I mean, which makes sense given who he was. Do you think this generation's socialist view will be greater than what happened in the 70s? Yet to be determined. I think there was less, like, the 70s was like the peak of a period of like post New Deal legislation, right? If you think about it that way. So there's this huge push throughout the 30s, 40s by socialists and by communists and unions against the United States. And all of this happens in Canada as well, which creates FDR's New Deal legislation, which FDR does in order to save capitalism, because like he wasn't a socialist. Like he didn't have those sorts of ideals. He just knew what needed to be done in order to save capitalism from itself. And he understood that if people put two and two together, they could just have a revolution the way that the Soviets did and just get rid of these oligarchs, just clear them out. They don't need to be part of the conversation at all. And they don't. And that's my general opinion. If we ever get to that point again where we have the opportunity to get rid of these guys, we should. Completely. It's like, why allow a single cancer cell to remain? It doesn't make sense to me. So and so because of the New Deal, because of that legislation, it created a very strong middle class, and which created a real upswell that sort of peaks throughout the 70s. And then the oligarch class, the capitalist class, worked almost immediately to start dismantling the New Deal legislation, which they've been doing steadily and are still doing. Considering learning Mandarin seems like it could be useful. Yeah. I'm of the opinion that if we ever get that kind of energy again, that created the New Deal legislation, that it could actually be much stronger. It could actually be much, much stronger, because we have opportunities because of the technologies that exist that I think the people who were living in the 30s and 40s could never have even dreamed of or even contemplated, right? Like the way solar panels work, the way that solar energy works, right? We are going to be walking into a period of time where it may be legitimate that a person could just like get a solar panel, put energy into a battery, and then go wherever they want and do whatever they want with it, right? You could turn around, sell that energy to some kind of centralized grid that's still going to exist, but you could also use it to power an electric vehicle and just travel around wherever, right? And just do whatever with it. And if you have enough solar panels, and you don't need to be connected to a centralized power grid, right? Like, and this is just like theory crafting by somebody who is just kind of making it up. Like, I'm not even talking about any practical realities or anything, but like, and then you get into like automated cars, you get into all kinds of stuff. So the upswell that could happen and the march towards a kind of for goodness sakes, the language is still there. New Green Deal, right? Green New Deal, rather, right? Green New Deal. Like, the language is all there. And we could very well enter a period of time where we simply say, like, the capitalists will start ceding power the way that they did with FDR, and we'll just simply say, who gives a shit about these capitalists at all? Like, why are we, like, we're not going to work for these guys. We're not going to do anything for these guys. These guys are like pedophile nightmare monsters. Like, we're obviously not going to work. Like, even back during FDR's time, there wasn't like the revelations that all of these billionaires are involved in a pedophile sex ring, right? Like, I think this time the billionaires have gone so far, they've lost so much support, that the only people who are going to fight on behalf of these guys are like the complicit and the deeply deluded. And as time moves forward and as the billionaires make the situation worse, because that's all they can do, they can't make it better because they're sociopaths, the stronger revulsion will come from the populace and the stronger the movement will be. And because these guys are like literally pedophiles, like, there's no saving them. I think that's the trajectory. So, and the only way that they'll end up defending themselves is outright fascism, right? Which, I mean, the Canada Infrastructure Bank is a fascist institution. It's an attempt to entrench capitalism into our society. We should shut that down. That will be a moment where we will see if this movement will be successful or not. If it can successfully shut down the Canada Infrastructure Bank, then it can be a successful movement. But if it cannot, then it's a failure. And I really do think it's that clean cut at this stage in the game. Barrel-shaped economy was preached about in the 70s. Yeah, the idea that like the society should kind of look like that, where like you have as few people as possible in the lower classes, and then as many people as possible in the middle, and then as few people as possible. Yeah. Whereas now it's just like it's literally, that's what the economy looks like. I agree with you totally. I feel like it's all or nothing now. If socialism loses its imperialism for the next few decades, oh, that's a rosy view, which would lead to the end of modern civilization as we know it. If socialism loses to imperialism, we are talking about like a 1,000-year trend. Like I'm not talking about decades. Like if we lose to imperialism in this stage of the game, we are talking about like a technological military oligarchy that will dominate global politics completely for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. Like this is a crucial turning point, and all signs are pointing to America collapsing, at least domestically, right? That the lives of the average United States citizen is only going to get worse. And this is going to coincide with a push by the empire to consolidate power militarily on the world stage, which it may or may not be able to do. And a lot, actually, at this stage in the game hinges on whether or not electric vehicles actually do take over the market. Because if electric vehicles actually do take over the market and replace fossil fuel vehicles, that would plunge the price of oil downward to the point where it would crater the American dollar. And a whole bunch of other people will start, a whole bunch of other nations will start trading in other currencies. And there's the end of United States supremacy as an economic force. Still have all the nukes. They still have this giant military force, right? So we'll see how that all shakes. But really, we are at a stage now where if we don't do something, like if we don't look at one another and say, like, we need like a basic income, everybody needs food, everybody needs shelter, we need to be moving in a direction where everyone's base security is taken care of, and that base security is not tied to any kind of means test. And I mean any kind of means test. I mean that literally the worst person you know, the person who will sit on the couch and play video games all day, the person who will buy drugs, the person who will do all of those kinds of stuff, that person gets food and shelter. And unless we build a system that says everybody gets these things and it's just, that's what happens, forget about it, we're going to lose. We're going to lose badly. I'm more worried about self-driving vehicles, although there are a lot of idiot drivers out there. I'm mainly worried that it's just going to get pushed through. Right? Here, speaking of automated vehicles, let's see how long this is. Sure, 8 minutes from the Gravel Institute.
The pantheon of corporations that have emerged out of Silicon Valley, Uber occupies a special place. The company is worth $100 billion. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth of trips and delivery orders have been booked using its app. It gets tens of billions of dollars in revenue each year. Uber is everywhere, and the narrative of Uber is also everywhere. It says that Uber is innovative, that it can disrupt the taxi industry and make money doing it, and that it can offer flexibility and opportunity to its army of drivers. Everybody wins. there's one problem. None of that is true. Let's start with one basic fact. For a company so prominent, there's something very strange. Uber has never, not once, turned a single profit. You might be confused. How can it be that such a large company with such a popular service has simply never made money? When you find out the answer, you discover something important. You discover that Uber is fundamentally a scam, a company that exists to scam its investors, its users, and most importantly, to scam its workers. Despite everything you might hear, Uber is not a technology company. While the company may brag about its sophisticated algorithm, in reality, Uber is just another taxi company. There's nothing fundamentally more efficient about Uber than there was with your local taxi service. The business is the same. There's no real way to innovate someone driving someone or something from point A to point B. Using an app to match riders with drivers is so simple that local taxi companies do the same thing. In fact, Uber is less efficient than taxi companies. Most normal taxi companies don't spend huge amounts on marketing, or lobbying, or corporate headquarters. They don't pay their CEO $45 million a year. Uber has higher costs than traditional taxi operators in every category except fuel. So why is Uber everywhere while taxi companies go out of business? It all goes back to Uber's master plan. First, with massive amounts of money from venture capitalists, Uber subsidized significantly cheaper rides than what taxi companies could offer to attract customers away from them. Then, after years of undercutting competitors and driving them to bankruptcy, resulting in a wave of suicides by cab drivers, Uber established near monopolies in local markets.
This is the same narrative that Walmart used, by the way. Like, just pausing at this is capitalism 101. This is how you take over markets, and the capitalists do it. And this guy's going to spell it out for you. This is exactly what Walmart did.
Now, Uber is often the default way to get around if you don't have a car. And once Uber has eradicated its competition, it can make itself profitable at expense of users and drivers, raising its fares to what taxis offered or higher, while pushing down drivers' wages. The plan is not efficiency, it's monopoly. And that's not just me theorizing. A 73-page article in the Transportation Law Journal took a deep look at Uber's business and concluded one thing. Uber has no ability, now or in the foreseeable future, to earn sustainable profits in a competitive marketplace. Uber's investors cannot earn returns on the money they invest without achieving levels of market dominance that would allow them to exploit anti-competitive market power. So that is Uber's grand plan. It is not increasing the productivity or efficiency of the industry that it's in. It's subsidizing its rides with venture capital cash until it can build a monopoly and do whatever it wants. So users who buy Uber's narrative may be getting scammed, but no one is getting it worse than Uber's workers. So, Uber relies on classifying drivers as independent contractors. In the United States, that means an individual provides services to a company, but is independent of the company and its control. Uber says that because drivers can choose what work to accept and for how long, they're fully independent. Now, most of Uber's workers drive part-time, but they actually do relatively little driving, and 90% of them quit each year. The majority of Uber's labor is done by a smaller group of workers who drive full-time for the company. So who are these drivers? In cities like New York, the vast majority are immigrants from places like India, Bangladesh, and Haiti. They desperately need cash to support their families and send remittances back home. These are people at the very margins of our society. And how does Uber treat them? Uber treats them like a pool of cheap labor, easy to exploit and then discard. Uber's always been clear about one thing. It does not care about its drivers. At Uber's green light centers, where drivers register with the company, they were not even allowed to enter bathrooms reserved for employees. In fact, when Uber was talking about how it would become profitable, it stated clearly that it wanted to get rid of its drivers and transition entirely to self-driving cars. But Uber's technology was so bad that after burning billions of dollars, it had to give up. So for now, Uber is stuck with its drivers. And in order to appear like it's coming closer to profitability, it's been cutting their wages since 2015. Whenever Uber increases its cut from each trip or reduces the minimum rate for drivers, its margins improve by that much immediately. As a result, Uber drivers regularly earn less than the minimum wage. After taking hidden costs like fuel into account, the average Uber driver earns a little over $9 an hour, about 50% less than what taxi drivers made before Uber. In fact, half of Uber drivers live at or below the poverty level. 20% of them have to use food stamps to survive. Unable to afford a home, some drivers even sleep in their cars. Drivers with nothing to their name get trapped in predatory car rental schemes promoted by Uber. They garnish your wages until you've paid it off with interest. One study from Georgetown found that a third of drivers reported falling into a debt trap. Some ended up earning less than $5 an hour. And because its drivers are technically independent contractors, Uber can avoid pesky requirements like minimum wages, health insurance, or paid sick leave. Drivers can't unionize to bargain for better conditions. Uber has all the power, and it makes sure it can stay that way. When California tried to classify drivers as employees, Uber spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a campaign to overturn it with a ballot proposition written by Uber's lawyers. And even though Uber talks about flexibility, that's not what drivers actually experience. Drivers may not have physical bosses to order them around, but they're ruled by something even worse, an algorithmic overseer that's more intrusive than any flesh and blood boss could ever be. Uber's only actual innovations are in surveilling and disciplining its workforce. They're always watching, monitoring driving behavior, calculating fraud profiles, using invisible secret functions to discipline drivers as well as customers. Fall below an arbitrary threshold for ratings? Fired. Reject too many trips because you don't want to lose any money? Fired. Did a customer make a false report? Fired. So that's the freedom that Uber offers. It frees drivers to make below minimum wage, to sleep in their cars, to beg for 5-star ratings, and work themselves to the bone. But at the end of the day, Uber, like other gig companies, is an innovator. Not in technology, but in exploitation. It's leading the war against labor in ways other companies never thought possible. It oversees a pool of atomized, ultra-exploited laborers, writes its own regulations, and has done it all without earning a single cent of profit. Imagine what sort of world they'll need to start making one. I'm Edward Ongweso Jr., staff writer at Vice for the Gravel Institute.
Yeah, that's just a small taste of what capitalism is, right? Like they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on propaganda and advertising, and use slave labor, right? That's the only way capitalism actually works. And Ward, to your point, like hereditary oligarchy is the concern. That's exactly right. That like it's one like this is why I say that if we don't confront capital now, like in this generation, while people like me are alive, right? What will start to happen is that the hereditary oligarchs will simply start ruling without the propaganda, right? And once they begin to realize that they can maintain their positions of power and prestige without threat from the populace, even as they begin to rule openly and nakedly, then there's just no length that they won't go to, right? That the populace will simply not be able to push them off. And the only way that the populace is going to actually push them off and confront them is with mass general strikes. Like, that's what is going to have to happen. Because what we just saw there with Uber, that's literally every company that exists in capitalism. That's how capitalism works. That's what it does. It's not a bug, it's a feature in capitalism. That's how it works. Like, and people treat it like it's not doing that. Like, when they see a story like this, it's like, oh, the few bad apples. Like, and Americans are the worst. They get like a box that literally says on the side of it, this box will punch you in the face. And then they open up and a punching glove comes out and punches them right in the face. And they go, something's wrong with this box. It punched me in the face. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? It says on the box it will punch you in the face. Like, I don't know what to tell you. This is Elon. Elon wanted credit for making online payment easier, so he bought out PayPal. Elon wanted to have a cool and environmental brand, so he bought Tesla and stole the title of founder. Elon wanted to go to space without being smart, so he hired people to do the work for him. Elon wanted faster transportation, so he came up with an impractical idea for it. Elon does not do anything useful for the world. Elon is an apartheid profiting little bitch. Fuck Elon. Yep. Elon Musk is actually really dumb. Like, you should actually, like, do yourself a favor and listen to this guy talk and, like, have even the tiniest little grain of critical thinking or criticism or like critical analysis towards Elon Musk. His interview with Joe Rogan is like perfect for this. He's like a moron. Like he's a very not smart person, and like he's just cultivated an image of being smart. He's done it by like buying out companies who are doing something smart and then taking credit for what they do, right? Like he's a classic slimy, schemy capitalist, right? What's odd about Elon Musk, frankly, is that he feels the need to take credit. Like that's kind of what reveals his deep, like emptiness and narcissism, right? Is that instead of doing what all the other billionaires do, which is just quietly acquire resources, right? Like just quietly take over places and maybe like be seen as like a good investor, right? Or as like a good business person, like a Warren Buffett, for example, right? But that's not what he wants to be seen as. He wants to be seen, hey Jeff, how you doing? He wants to be seen as a genius. He wants to be seen as brilliant. He wants to be seen as this Tony Stark style figure. And I think it's because there's like a deep emptiness inside of him where he knows that he's not really valuable or worth anything, right? He understands that, which is why he keeps pursuing this desperate need for everyone around him to think that he's smart when he was just a rich kid that was born, you know, he's the son of an apartheid emerald miner. Like he is the least of us, and yet we're supposed to venerate him and pretend as though, oh, he's going to get us to Mars and that's somehow going to save humanity. It's actually really embarrassing how our society has just so easily been swooned by this rich apartheid moron. But I mean, if Donald Trump can become the president, then there's no lengths that will go. I have never felt safe with a stranger with no license or responsibility to the company driving me to or from my home. Yeah, I know, right? You're literally taking a lift from a stranger. It's so funny because you're absolutely right, Ruth. It's like we're told our whole lives, like, don't just get into vehicles with strangers, right? Like, don't do that. And yet, like, that's Uber's whole model. Just some person who, like, has an app and is just like, sure, I'll go there, right? Like, there's... Like, I remember when I was still working at the toy store, people started showing up, and it was right when the pandemic started, people started showing up, and it was, what was the name of the company? Anyway, it was like Shopify or one of these kinds of things where basically people would just come and pick up stuff from the store on behalf of people who were using it. So basically just servants, right, going around doing rich people's work for them, the way capitalism works. And the people who were using the app had no idea how to use the app because they literally just like downloaded it from like a Kijiji ad or something, right? And they were just like going through it. And I would have to like train them basically how to use this app. And hey DJ, how you doing? Right now we're just talking about we just did a watch of this this video about Uber, revealing that Uber is an exploitation model, which is like no shit, Sherlock. And we're just talking about capitalism and how it exploits people. And how technology is really going to increase that. Also, Elon Musk is an idiot. I don't know why people worship him. Well, I do know why people worship him, but we should stop. See, this is an interesting article right here. Today, 1 p.m., low of 3.1 Celsius is the lowest temperature in Toronto City. So there's this sort of idea that exists in the minds of climate change denialists that everything's supposed to get hot. But that's not how the weather patterns work. It's that everything's going to get more extreme. It's that we're going to have days that are like the hottest day on record, but then we'll also have days that are like the coldest day on record. And that'll kind of happen like suddenly and unexpectedly and unpredictably. And the line is generally going up, but it's going to be going up with like, so this might be caused by like a pressure system or something, and then the bounce back from that will spike us right back up. Oh, I used to know the difference here, Jeff. Let's learn together. Let's learn together. what is the difference between climate and weather? Climate or weather refers to short-term atmospheric conditions, whereas climate is the weather of a specific region averaged over a long period of time. Okay, so like if it's raining, that's the weather, but if it's a rainy environment, that's the climate. I think I get it. So if you're in Seattle, the climate is rainy, but it could be sunshiny out right now, and that would be the weather. We did it. We're all learning something today. I'll say the quiet part out loud. It's time for progressives to start condemning anti-Semitism, which we do, and violent attacks on Jewish people, which we do, with the same intention and vigor demonstrated in other areas of activism. The silence has been deafening because we're not facing Judaism or Jewish people. We're facing Zionists and Zionist apologists. And maybe if you attempted to make that distinction, part of the problem is that we can't actually talk about Zionism. I've noticed this with my own videos. If I put Zionism, if I put a hashtag Zionist or put Zionism in the subject or even in the description, the algorithm suppresses it. It's very obvious that's what's happening. So we can't even have a conversation about Zionism. We can't even really talk about Zionism without YouTube suppressing it. And I'm positive that that's happening across the board. And so Representative Dean Phillips gets to come out and strawman the whole argument and pretend as though the progressives are being silent about Judaism, when the reality is that, no, we've made a distinction between Judaism and Zionism that you refuse to acknowledge, because that's how the whole thing is propped up, right? People, I just did a video, you can go watch that video, it's on my channel, it's been completely suppressed, it only has like 40 views or something like this, which is like easily half than any other video, and then you can see how it's done. I even call it out in that video. It's as easy as saying, how dare you speak out against Judaism, and then just completely pretend as though Zionism and Judaism are the same thing. It's like saying the Ku Klux Klan and Christianity are the same thing, or Nazism and Germanism are the same thing. Right? Like, and as long as you maintain that connection, you can pretend all you like that that progressives are being silent about it. I was going to search something. Oh yeah, right. Al Jazeera. Forgot to start. I usually start with a live. Why is the Palestinian Authority arresting West Bank activists? Interesting question. The officers' short protest. I suspect it's just simply like they know what happens and they just don't want to see it. Right? Like, when Palestinians protest, the Israelis murder them. And like, in this political environment that we're in, if the Palestinians form some kind of protest, even if it's like 20 people, it'll just start with an assassination, and then the bombing will resume, right? Like, they know. And also there's quite a bit of concern that some of these Palestinian protesters are actually working on behalf of the Israeli government, specifically to give the Israeli government the casus belli they need to kick it back up. Yeah, I think that's right, Dan. I know that QAnon is one of them. If you start talking about QAnon, YouTube will deprioritize and demonetize. And it doesn't matter how like informed you're being. It doesn't matter how. It doesn't matter if your information is correct. It simply matters if you're actually talking about it at all. Which I think is a mistake. I think it's a bad thing to do. Like, it's a big mistake from a social perspective, but that's not how capitalists view the world, right? They don't care about the society. They care about their personal wealth. Yeah. It's the worship that gets me. Like, I've done enough research in economics and I've seen enough that my general opinion on money is that it is something that humanity just creates. We do just sort of, money is something that we just manifest. And if you got rid of, like, the dollar, the populations would simply start using some other commodity. This is why, like, a resource-based economy that people argue for, I'm like, okay, cool. One of those resources will become the common currency, right? And that's just what happens. And, like, there's a video game series called Fallout that sort of riffs on this idea where in a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear Holocaust world, survivors exchange trade through bottle caps. So, like, Coke bottle caps. And so that means that every time you find, like, a Coca-Cola, or what they call a Nuka-Cola, you drink it and you get a bottle cap, and then that's $1 that you get to spend in the economy. And a similar thing will happen. To me, it's less about the money system and more to do with the ideology that we're using, right? That even if there wasn't money in this, like, even if we weren't using money, our ideology would still manifest itself in evil, demonic ways in our system, right? And like, we would be, instead of worshiping somebody who had hundreds of billions of dollars in offshore accounts, we would just be worshiping the person who had all of the houses, right? That fundamentally we are worshiping wealth. And, like, and not only worshiping wealth, but we're worshiping, like, the grotesque display of wealth, right? That, take a look at a show like the Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Take a look at it at all of these modern movies and all of these, sort of, like, the Avengers and all of this. Like, we're obviously being presented with a worldview that tells us, look at this lavish, grotesque, overwhelming pageantry of wealth. And that by itself is supposed to be worth something. When you actually start to dissect this whole Avengers franchise and the whole thing, you realize how vapid and empty the whole thing is, right? Like, what's their seminal moral statement? What do they stand for? Who are they? What do they care about? All of the kind of base central questions that you expect from a narrative. And really, you just walk away with the general sense of, like, they don't know. Because the hope is that you'll be so entranced by the grotesque, overwhelming display of wealth, which is supposed to connect to your conditioning that wealth, that you are worshiping wealth, and that you are supposed to admire grotesque displays of wealth, that's all it is. Right? That and anytime they're presented with any kind of difficult question, they just sort of default into either truisms or patent nonsense, just complete and patent nonsense. Like slogans, like a really, really clear example of this is, like, right at the end of the series. I don't care about spoilers. Like, this is garbage TV. Right at the end of the series, Captain America ends up going back in time and then lives his whole life and then meets the Avengers again as an old man. And one of them says to him, like, you should tell us that story. And Captain America goes, no, I don't think I will. And kind of turns and looks off. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. That's just a slogan, right? Like, it's just this, like, kind of cool thing he said that outright tells you I'm not going to tell you anything, right? And, like at the end of the first Christian Bale Batman movie, right? He's like, I'm not gonna kill you, but I don't have to save you either. And when you actually dissect that, it's like a complete empty statement. Like, it's complete nonsense. Like, it really is just like a washing of any kind of, it's just a washing of his hands of any kind of need to uphold saving people as a good, right? Like, because it's empty, right? Like any critical analysis of Batman, especially, really shows you that Bruce Wayne is a deeply mentally disturbed person who could very easily solve the problem of crime in this city with the billions of dollars that he has at his disposal, and instead chooses to dress up as a bat to fight low-level criminals with nuclear technology, right? Like, Batman has a significant... And, like, it's all justified because my parents are dead. Lots of people's parents are dead, dude. Like, lots of people have lived through tragedy. Like, very, very few people dress up like bats and fight people with, like, high weapons grade experimental technology. Like, it's the story of capitalism's, like, mental illness, the Batman narrative. And yet we're supposed to watch it. We're supposed to side with Bruce Wayne. We're supposed to be on his side the whole time, even though everything he says is complete and total nonsense or a strict justification of fascism, while he is actively withholding the resources that are necessary to solve the problem that he is choosing instead to fight through military means. Like, literally, you're telling me the Bat Jet, he has a jet that's shaped like a bat. Like, that's made custom. That costs a lot of money. You're telling me that the money he put into the Bat Jet wouldn't simply be better served by taking that money and just giving it to these people who are turning to crime because they can't find food and shelter? Like, that's the net. Like, all of these evil villains have henchmen. Well, you think these henchmen are doing it for the love of the game? Right? No, they've got kids to feed. And what's really weird is that, like, lots of times in the comic books and in the cartoon series, the villains are made sympathetic for this kind of thing. Like Sandman in the in Spider-Man 3, right? He literally had a kid who was dying of a disease, a treatable disease, and he couldn't afford the health care. And so now he's a criminal. And you're like, well, okay. And simultaneously, while that's happening, the Avengers are building like a fucking space station. And you're like, could we maybe like 1 + 1 = 2 this? Could we maybe like make this happen? No. We need to worship wealth. We need to look at wealth and say, oh, this person is wealthy, therefore whatever they do is by itself worth watching, right? That's the Kardashians in a nutshell, right? They are wealthy, therefore anything they do is worth our attention. And then you turn and you look at them and you realize these people are worthless. They're completely vapid. They offer nothing to us, right? Except the pleasure of pretending to know someone who has a lot of wealth. Because that's how deep the wealth worship has become. That, like, Kim Kardashian is not an important figure. And when she dies, no one will really care. Like, we might, like, mourn her in, like, a abstract kind of a way, but we don't know who she is. We don't know anything about her, and she barely does anything worthy of note in the world. Even though, I mean, she could be a perfectly nice woman who's trying to do her best, right, in the world. But all of that is completely irrelevant because fundamentally the only reason anybody pays attention to her is because she's rich. And if she wasn't, people wouldn't give a shit. Like, where's the reality TV show about the poor barista? Doesn't fucking exist. People can access whatever they want in a resource-based economy. It's like living in a library. No need to carry money when you can access whatever. People get jumped for money in this society. Yeah, we're worshiping wealth. Have you seen the film The Choice is Ours? I have, yeah. Batman is a conservative. Batman's a far-right Republican. Like, he's not progressive. He doesn't fight for truth, justice, and the American way. He does fight for the American way. We're just starting to realize that the American way is to subserviate ourselves to him, right? Which is how Batman makes his money, incidentally, right? Like, Batman doesn't work. Bruce Wayne doesn't work, right? He's a hereditary billionaire who makes his money because he owns companies where other people do work for him, right? Batman is a far-right Republican. He would vote for Donald Trump. Yeah, I don't watch those. They're too ridiculous for me. And they are ridiculous. Like, they are. But at the same time, they are, like, culturally important. right? My background is theater, and one of the conclusions you have to make if you want to study theater to any success is that if it's popular, it's saying something true, right? Not necessarily something good, not necessarily something that you want to be true, but something that is true no matter what. And the thing that's true about those shows is that the reason why they're popular is because the people in them are rich. Only lasted 20 seasons for the show to end. Did they finally shut down Keeping Up with the Kardashians? Batman is punishment equals justice without addressing the social issues causing the problems. Absolutely wig with. Which is what Joker did really brilliantly. I would say the only decent film that has come out of this like superhero era has been Joker. That there have been really great performances. Like Heath Ledger's Joker was really good performance. And people really liked it from that perspective, I think. Also, people really like Joker as a character generally because it speaks to something inside of ourselves. There's something true there that we all love about that character, just the unbridled chaos that he brings to the table. But like Joker is probably the only one of those films that actually says something important and has something to say about the society that's in it. Very timely, very important film in my view. And then I think the next superhero movie that even comes close is probably Toby Mcguire's first Spider-Man. And that's only because it had a clear moral message, which is with great power comes great responsibility, which we then turned around and completely ignored. Gunther should have gotten a spin-off to see how he feels about waiting on these people that spend most of the time in a coffee shop and working. Well, that's just it. Like, it wouldn't have worked. And again, like, think about Friends. Friends is a great example of kind of what I'm talking about. That, like, clearly the people who are watching must be filthy rich. Look at their apartment, first of all, right? And they come up with some kind of excuse, but, like, they are the hereditary inheritors of this enormous apartment in central Manhattan, right? While Monica is like a cook who eventually becomes like a top level cook, right? So she's rich. Ross is a tenured professor at university, so he's wealthy. Nobody ever says what it is that Chandler even does, so one assumes that he can be as wealthy or as not wealthy as you want him to be. And then the people who are quote unquote supposed to be poor, right? Like Rachel. Rachel is rich. Like her family is hyper rich, and so her like lark where she's like going to be a waitress or all that kind of stuff is kind of like pointless. Like we know that she's rich. We know that if all of this collapsed, she would just go back to her mommy and daddy. And the poor person, the poor people in the story are Joey, who is like an actor who incidentally becomes successful at it. He starts working at Days of Our Lives, right? Because that's the narrative that has to exist in all American television, that the arc has to be to the good, that capitalism works ultimately, that Joey can't simply end up as a washed up actor who can't find work, which is what happens to most of them. No, he has to actually be successful. He has to end up on Days of Our Life. He has to end up with a big show and his own spinoff and all this. And then the person who's actually living in like a poverty kind of situation would be Phoebe, right? And it's very telling. We never see her apartment. We never see where she lives. She is like a visitor to the rich people's lives, and she keeps coming. She abandons everything in her life so that she can spend most of her life with the rich people, right? And a show with Gunther as a spinoff would fail immediately, because ultimately you'd have to be confronted with the fact that Gunther is poor. And unless the whole thesis of your show revolves around that idea, like I'm thinking about the show Two Broke Girls, right? Which is a show about like two waitresses who are, you know, poor and trying to make a go of it and all of this kind of stuff. But then that falls into like vacationism, right? Rich people do this with shows and media and stuff, which is they'll like a show that deals with people who are in this poverty situation, but it's done on kind of a vacation level, right? Where they're just sort of, oh, let's look how the poor people live, right? One of the shows that I think subverts this a little bit is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think there's a show that's resoundingly successful. It's been on for a long, long time. That, I mean, those guys are poor. They've got this bar, but that's it. So there's kind of but generally our media does not deal at all with issues of poverty, and in fact, just worships. We're supposed to worship rich people, and I'm over it. Yeah, Elon Musk is today's Batman. He thinks he's helping, but it isn't. Just needs spaceships and cars. Yeah, they all failed upwards. Yeah. Yeah, Married with Children was more relatable to everybody. And what's so funny is that the model of Married with Children, like Married with Children as a show, really reveals how far we've fallen as a people, right? Like Al Bundy was a shoe salesman. He didn't own the shoe store. He was just a shoe salesman working for minimum wage. He had a house, a wife who didn't work, 2 kids who didn't work, and a car and a dog. And they went on vacation. And people watching that show at the time, myself included, were just like, yeah, that's normal. That's kind of, if somebody was struggling, it would be like Al Bundy complaining that the vehicle that he has is no good, right? Like, this car is such a beater, like, this kind of stuff. That would be somebody who's struggling, right? Back then. And like now, if Al Bundy showed up on television now and those were the circumstances, right? People would be like, did he get an inheritance? Like, why does he have this house? Where is that coming from? His wife doesn't work. His kids aren't working. Well, what's happening? Roseanne was really relatable, actually. Roseanne was actually a really special show in this regard, right? Like Roseanne, think about this, man. Like, Roseanne was not like a classical beauty, right? She didn't have like, take a look at the women who are on TV. Like, you can't be on TV. Like, how many times have we seen, like, a grotesque, ugly dude, right? And then his wife is a babe, right? Who just tolerates his ugliness and his stupid bullshit, right? And then she just kind of ends up being, like, a foil for his absurdity, right? That's, like, every television show that's ever been on TV. All the way back to, like, the Honeymooners, right? Whereas Roseanne herself was like a forceful person with like an interesting personality who, sure, she had a husband in John Goodman who did stupid things and they had that kind of stuff, but they both had that going on. And so it was like a really different dynamic on Roseanne. And so that ends up being a very special show, I think, that I don't think you could duplicate. I think a lot of it had to do with Roseanne as a person, just who Roseanne Barr is. I like the episodes on Sunny where they get addicted to crack. Jeez. You don't see real world situations like that in a sitcom. That's absolutely the truth. That's absolutely the truth. No, but King of Queens is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, the fellow is a big, fat, dumb idiot who does dumb stuff and gets into all kinds of trouble. And his wife is like a total babe whose whole role on the show is just to put her hand on her hip and look at him like this. That's her whole job. Well, and it's extremely telling, Wigwith, that they used Ed O'Neill as the grandfather on that show, right? Because that is the trajectory of Al Bundy, right? Ultimately, like, you're just this boomer, right? And he divorces Peg, marries this hot Latina, right? Like, it's but like, even Modern Family is a bit incomprehensible, right? Like, the family, the sort of traditional nuclear family is, she doesn't work, her kids don't work, and what's his job? Oh, he's a real estate agent. When? He's a real estate agent during one of the largest housing crashes in American history. So Modern Family is just complete fantasy. It's like a total farce that I think really, the strength of that show really was the gay couple. I think that's really what it came down to, is that, like, the nuclear family was way less important. And the show really was about normalizing the gay couple, and that there was so much energy going on where people wanted that to happen, which I think is great. It was a great cultural touchstone for sure. But it didn't take too long for me to be like, okay, so those two are normal, and that's been normalized, and that's great. What does the show have to offer? Oh, a fucking fairy tale, right? That is completely unrelatable to almost everybody, right? Hi, Dave. How you doing, bud? Anyway, that's my culture riff for the day. I would like to inform you that there is snow. So this is from Toronto, our Toronto. Let's see how long this is. 4 minutes.
What's up, man? Hey, yo, what's going on?
Oh, this is Informer. I can't show that. I don't know. Is this on YouTube? I could probably show it. I don't care. BC campers say they were run off campsite by partying group who made veiled death threats. That's scary. Investigate the heck out of that. Yeah, why students should support basic income? You don't need an article for this. Like, students should support a basic income because you'll let them go to school without having to work at a Tim Hortons at the same time. This is sort of the baffling thing to me about especially boomers in our society who are like, yeah, you should work hard and all that and so on and so forth. And I'm like, so you literally want the person who's supposed to do the heart surgery that you're going to have because you keep jamming cheeseburgers in your fat face. You literally want that person to, while they were learning how to do the surgery that they need to do to you, to also have been working at Tim Hortons. That's extremely stupid. Like, and the more I talk about that, the more I think about, like, that particular relationship, the stupider it becomes. Oh, you want people who are supposed to be learning, like, how to, like, thermodynamics and, like, nuclear technologies to also have been working at a shoe store. Like, you're very, very dumb if you think that way. Like, you want the people who are going to be making decisions in the legal system for what is right or wrong for our society moving over to also be working at Tim Hortons while they're learning how to do that. Like, are you seeing how fucking dumb that is? Are you hearing how stupid that sounds? Because it sounds extremely stupid. Hi, Dave. Media is a reflection of the values they want people to have. It's a tool of cultural hegemony. Exactly. That's exactly why that is why I love to study it. I have a degree in theater, right? Studying media and studying what people are actually entertained by is fascinating and worthwhile, but it's also why the capitalists need to stop it. Because if you actually do this observation and you do it correctly, you start to realize pretty quickly that, like, oh, capitalism is like this grotesque demon that morphs and shifts everything. Yeah, I'm a genius, DJ. It's time for people to fucking recognize that I'm super fucking smart. Yeah, they also they hate education generally, right? They don't want an educated populace who understands what the world looks like. They don't want any of that. They just want somebody who's going to go to work, do the job that they want them to do, go home, drink beer, forget about it, wake up, do it again. That's what they want, right? Anything outside of that, they need to crush it. They need to get rid of it. You can't have well-educated people in capitalism, because if you had well-educated people, they might actually imagine a different situation, right? They might imagine a scenario, a world without capitalism, and you can't have that. I mean, there's also that. Science, I mean, everything does. Like, everything points to this being a total BS system that doesn't work. That's scientifically but it's also like culturally and like humanly invalid. Like, you're literally enslaving yourself to a group of people who don't do any work while simultaneously being told that you're lazy for wanting to see your friends and family. Like, it's incoherent. That's the thing about capitalism, is that it is incoherent. It has contradictions inside of it that make the system stop working. And that's like deep Marx. That's like Marx, like 101. That like he really figured out really early on that, like, oh, there's like internal contradictions that will eventually come to a head and stop working. Like, here's a great contradiction. So the capitalists want wages to be zero, right? They want wages to be zero. Let's just be honest, right? They want slavery. That's their game. They want slavery. The problem is that if your wages are zero and you pay no wages to anybody, well, then those people can't actually afford the goods that you're creating. And so the system stops working, because it doesn't matter what you make, nobody can buy it. And that's the trajectory that we're actually on. Yeah, and your mind does get warped by lots of money, Ruth. That's actually a really interesting point. There's great research coming out of one of the Californian universities. I forget which one offhand right now, but they're doing big studies about like the effect of wealth on the human mind and what it does. And all of their conclusions are showing that the more wealth you accrue, especially if there's like big inequality in the system, the more sociopathic you get. That you just lose the ability to empathize with other people. Yeah, wealth and power invariably creates violent antisocial behaviors. Yeah. The people like Trump don't want to be with their family, while the people working for them do. Yeah. Worth reporting, 1,273 cases, so that's actually up from yesterday. So, but not by a dramatic amount. So it's like we've gone down, and now we've had like a little uptick. I suspect that we'll warble there for a little while, right? And then you've got the major doctors saying we need to get down to about 500 to 600 before we should think about opening up. And so there's this big push going on to get everybody vaccinated right now that people like me are just being lazy about, not actually doing anything about it. But if you haven't had your vaccinations and you can have your vaccinations, Ruth, I'm looking at you. I don't know if it's probably not available quite yet. Wait a week, it will go up again, maybe. Yeah, you might be right. So we're in a bit of a wait and see sort of situation. And Ruth, you're not speaking from the outskirts of the conversation. Most Canadians are skeptical. Most Canadians are like hopeful but skeptical. Yeah, meanwhile, Alberta is celebrating with a rodeo. Classic Alberta, eh? Of course it's got to be a rodeo, right? Yeehaw! Let's get those bulls in those pens. Make sure we electrocute them to get them kicking. Union proud. As Einstein stated, man cannot solve problems by using the same practices that he was using when he created the problem in the first place. Absolutely true. Opinion, keep schools closed and work on a safer September mentally and physically. I don't know why you would ever even contemplate opening up schools this year. It's already the end of May, June. Like, July, August were closed for summer anyway. So you're literally telling me you want to open up for 1 month and you expect that to be beneficial somehow? I think you're nuts. I think you're absolutely out of your mind. Like, call it a wash. School year's over. Just do everything you can to exactly make September good. If you can make September good, right? Yeah, because they need the parents back in their cubicles. Yeah. Which is odd, actually. I actually find this a bit odd because all of the numbers that I've seen are showing that productivity has either remained completely stable or has actually gone up with people working from home. And lots of, like, the workers enjoy it more. It's maintaining productivity. Like, why is there this push to get people back to like driving on the transit system, all that kind of stuff? Like, well, automation, but you'd think they would be able to automate that system anyway, right? Like, why is it so important to have everybody congregate in a building if you don't have to, and it doesn't affect productivity, or if it, in some cases, it increases productivity? So I don't fully understand the push outside of like the simple narrative of control, right? That it's about capitalists' control. It isn't about productivity. It's never been about productivity. It's just about creating control mechanisms. Because if people are not going to work every day, they're not traveling, and that means that they're not stopping at Timmy's, they're not stopping at a grocery store or a supermarket, they're not stopping in between that on their travels. If they're working from home, they're probably not buying a car, right? They're probably not buying these sorts of superfluous creations of the capitalist system. And they're probably more likely to demand better transit utilities, right? So I guess from that perspective, it makes sense. Like from a world building perspective. Yeah, and relaxed people are not good for CEO control, generally. Like if you're relaxed and you're feeling good, you might be willing to like, well, you think about like the amount of time that's wasted on transit, right? Like if you're commuting like 2 hours a day, well, that's 2 hours that you're not using finding another job or realizing that the capitalist system is completely fucking you. Yeah, David Graeber, really, really good, really brilliant. His thesis on BS Jobs is exactly right. Like, that's the first thing that would happen if you had a basic income, right? Like, all of those BS jobs would just disappear. And the capitalists would lament it, and they'd be like, oh, no, all these jobs are being lost. And the populace would understand very clearly that it's like, those jobs were always bullshit. They were completely irrelevant. They did not matter. And capitalism just doesn't, like, it doesn't reward, capitalism doesn't reward necessary work. Right? It doesn't reward things like motherhood. It doesn't reward like grocery workers. It doesn't reward any of that. Right? It rewards worthless CEOs who are just willing to maintain the system of control. That's it. Right? Like if you work hard to appease the capitalists, you too could become a worthless CEO and sit in an office and do nothing, right? Yeah, David Graeber's death was a big loss for the left. Like he's one of those figures that I think has attained a kind of Michael Parenti style notoriety, but if you're not inside the leftist circles, I don't think you know who he is. Not somebody like Noam Chomsky. I think people have a general idea of who Noam Chomsky is, and David Graeber could have gotten to that level, I think. But yeah, people have seen you don't need to shop 24/7. People just need to calm the fuck down. And generally, I think that's true. And people are really starting to recognize that, like, what they miss during these lockdown periods is not the shopping, is not the pace, is not the franticness. It's their friends and their family. That's who they miss. And, like, so when we open up, do you think people are going to try to gravitate towards seeing their friends and family? Or do you think they're going to be like, yeah, capitalists, let's go back to this bullshit? Oh, yeah. That kind of claim, Dave, I like to speculate on, but ultimately, we need some kind of serious evidence before we make those sorts of claims. Most Ontarians could be fully vaccinated against COVID by the end of summer, and then the variant will come in and make everything pointless. Fourth TTC worker dies of COVID-19. Oh yeah, John, there's no COVID on the TTC. There's so little cases on the TTC. Like, one of my big statements about what's happening during all of this is people leave their houses, they go on unenclosed tube, which is the TTC, and then go work with a bunch of other people who have done exactly the same thing in an enclosed indoor environment, and then get back on the tube and then go home. And, like, I have some people telling me like, oh, there's not COVID doesn't go on the T. There's no COVID on the TTC. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. There's no COVID on the TTC. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. And it's something we always need to be kind of aware of. Like, I think about Michael Brooks that way, right? Like, especially now with where the technology is, right? Like, you're telling me that there isn't, like, a gun that shoots waves to give people cancer? You're telling me that doesn't exist? Like, you're telling me that they couldn't just, like, drive by, like, Jack Layton. Jack Layton died of cancer, right? At a very timely moment. Notice how timely it was, his death. Hey, Robin, how you doing? And, like, there's always been a little part of me that has been like, yeah, if I found out that there was, like, a CSIS or CIA operation where every single day for a month they had a guy pointing a high-powered, like, X-ray rifle at him as he walked from his vehicle to his house. So they just shot him with this, like, high radioactive wave gun from, you know, a nearby house. Like, if I found that out, I would be like, oh, okay. It wouldn't create any kind of indignation or surprise in me at all. I literally would be like, oh, okay, yeah. I'd report on it. I'd talk about it. But, like, I wouldn't be surprised by it. It wouldn't shock me even a little. Zionism and Judaism are related only insofar as they have a similar source. But they have diverged significantly enough that it is no longer possible. Like, if you say that Zionism and Judaism are related, and then you use Judaism as a defense of Zionism, it's pretty much the same as saying like like the Taliban or Al Qaeda is Islam, right? Like it's that kind of, it is that kind of way of looking at the world, that like the Nazis and the Germans are the same, the Ku Klux Klan and the Christians are the same. It's like, no, they are distinct. And every single time I have seen somebody defending Israel, it is because they have refused to acknowledge that there is this distinction being made, that Judaism is distinct from Zionism, and that Zionism is distinct from Judaism. And if we cannot talk about Zionism as its own distinct thing, then we can very easily be called just anti-Semitic. You can dismiss anybody you'd like if you're refusing to acknowledge that there is a distinction to be made between the Ku Klux Klan and Christianity. Then all Christians are bad or good, right? And there's no wiggle room to be had. Looting is 25 billionaires increasing their wealth by 255 billion in 2 months, while up to 580 million people throughout the world are pushed into poverty during this horrific pandemic. That's looting. Yep. Yep. That's why I am. That's why I don't really mind if people go around smashing the place up. Like, if there are big protests and there's massive property damage, I'm just kind of like, okay. Like, yeah. That's what happens when you're in a war, right? Like. Look at that.
What the fuck?
What the fuck? That's an odd one. Snow. Snow, no less. Wow. You've heard of unpaid internship, but have you ever heard of reversed financed internships? So you have to pay $15 an hour to work there. Shameless. Shameless. And evil. An Israeli geneticist, Avigdor Kanner, created the world's first featherless chicken at the genetics faculty in Revolt, wow, there's a lot of words in this, dude. Agronomy. Okay, Institute near Tel Aviv, Israel. The bearskin bird was created by crossbreeding a broiler with a species that has a featherless neck. The idea behind the development of this naked bird is that it will create a more convenient and energy-efficient chicken, which can live in warm countries where featherless chickens don't do well and cooling systems are too expensive. And, of course, the bird doesn't require plucking, saving additional money, and proposing plants. Wild. That's all I have to say about that. That's just wild. Yeah, the internship. There's some form of in Soviet Russia joke there somewhere. No, so the Soviets would never do something so grotesque, right? The Soviets paid their people. Like, you did work, you got paid. Like, it's very, very straightforward. Like, this idea that, like, that the Soviets were, like, the Soviets would never dream of doing what the capitalists do. Like, it's sort of, it's become like this, it's become sort of common to just assume that, like, oh yeah, Soviet Russia was like this total shithole. But, like, you actually go and look at it and you're like, this seems pretty fucking reasonable to me. Like, this seems like a pretty reasonable situation to me. And, like, and of course, the thing that kills me the most, and this happens all the time here in Canada, is, like, you'll have somebody who, like, fled the country, what they say is fleeing the country or leaving the country, right? And they tell you their story, and they're like, oh yeah, it was so terrible there, here's my story. And, like, you listen, and you're like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. And then, like, it steadily dawns on you that, like, wait, you're a person that was able to take everything you had and leave a country half a world away. So that means you're rich, right? So yeah, like, oh yeah, you fled the Soviets during a revolution that was against the wealthy. Like, so I always grain of salt a lot of stuff I hear, because it's like, it's coming from the rich people, right? Oh yeah, like the Yakov Smirnoff stuff, right? Like, in Soviet Russia, you pay job, right? In neoliberal America, you pay job. I think we did it, Robin. We figured it out. In neoliberal America, oh, no. It would be. In Soviet Russia, job pays you. Because in neoliberal America, you pay job. Anyway. Have you heard of the origins of the doctrine of discovery? That sounds like I'm going into like a Harry Potter novel or something, right? The origins of the doctrine of discovery. Mr. Potter, we are here to find the origin of the doctrine of discovery. I haven't. Doesn't matter, the grocery store would charge you extra for the specialty chicken. Yeah, Ruth, you did it. You figured out what the capitalists would do, for sure. Oh, we're having Dave and Ward are going to go at it about Israel, guys. We're going to solve Israeli politics in the chat today. That's what's going to happen. Just so you know, Ward, my position generally is that the belief that Israel is a Jewish state is not a Jewish position, right? It's a Judaic position. It's a political position that is espoused by Zionists and always has been espoused by Zionists. That you could consider like a sect of Judaism if you wanted, but the conflagration that Zionism is like Judaism is like the whole of Judaic thought. That I don't think can be maintained, and that the common belief that Israel is a Jewish state is Zionism. Like, that is Zionism. The link's not going to show up, bud. I should just search it. The origins of the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery was used by European monarchies. I'm going to love this. Beginning in the mid-15th century, as a means of legitimizing. Oh, I have heard of this. This is like, we found it, so it's ours, right? Like, and of course, it only matters if white people find stuff, and then all the people who are there. Yeah. Yeah, played a central role in the Spanish conquest. Yeah. The Europeans found it, therefore it's ours. Oh, hey, there's people here. Well, those aren't real people. We can get rid of them. Like, yeah. No, like, any of this kind of stuff, like conquests and colonizing and all of this, were always legal. Like, the Holocaust was completely legal, right? It was done through the legal system. The courts knew it was happening, right? It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't shocking. So, well, and American evangelicals they're heretics. They're heretics to the ground from the outset, right? Like, literally their entire doctrine of faith and their entire worldview falls apart the minute you read the Bible. If you literally take the Bible, open it up, and read it for like any length of time, you realize that these evangelicals are completely disinterested in the Bible. Like, all of the evangelical, like these mega churches, right? All of these evangelicals are frauds. And even more than that, they know that they're frauds. Like, they know that they are illiterate. They know that they don't know anything. They know that there's a reason why are these guys not going around having significant debates with anybody, right? Why is somebody like Pat Robertson or all the rest, I'm blanking completely at the moment, why do they not feel the need to spread the gospel and have debates with people? Why is there not even an interreligious discourse that occurs? Why are the evangelicals not having conversations with Catholics or Anglicans? It's because they know that they are frauds, right? They are con men at the core. How do we know that's true? Because they're literally taking a doctrine that tells them, give your money to the poor, right? That love your neighbor as yourself includes giving money away to the poor, and helping the least among us and all of this. They're taking that doctrine and they're enriching themselves with it, right? Like, you're a con man if you're doing that. And evangelical Christianity, like, there's a reason why they completely align themselves with Trump, because they recognize, like, game recognizes game, right? Like, they didn't discourage Trump. They didn't call him out. They didn't condemn him. They didn't do any of that kind of stuff, because ultimately they looked at him and said, oh, it's another con man. I get what he's doing. Yeah, I can respect that. And so the con men all got together and took over for a little while. Well, yeah, Jeff, like, what's the prosperity gospel, right? The prosperity gospel literally is that God will bestow wealth and riches to those who are worthy of it, right? It literally is a worship of wealth as God's divine blessing, right? That if you're wealthy, it's because God wants you to be, and if you're not wealthy, it means you must be dirty in the eyes of God. It's wealth worship. It's what I was talking about earlier. And they espouse it openly, right? But you get your Bible. The reason why I'm pointing over here is I have a Bible just sitting right over here. You go and grab your Bible, you open it up, you flip through the pages, you give it a read, right? Especially the New Testament. You find out pretty quickly that the New Testament is pretty clear. Like, the Bible, it's even made more clear in the Old Testament, but it's like very clear that, like, oh, God doesn't give a fuck about that at all. Like, he will wipe you out. What is the book of Job if not this, right? The book of Job is literally a confrontation of the prosperity gospel, where God and the devil make a bet with one another. The bet being that, oh, Job is currently wealthy. has a big family and like a lot of property. And so of course he considers himself a holy man because look how good his life is. And so God says, no, Job's a holy man and he'd be that way anyway. And so the devil is like, well, then let me fuck him up. Let's see. And God goes, okay, perfect. Let's do it. And so the devil goes down. He literally murders Job's family, destroys his house, destroys all his property, wipes out his cattle. It's like a plague on Job. Down to like Job gets boils on his feet and is covered in like his health declines, like he loses all his hair. It's a total disaster for Job. And his friends show up, and Job is still maintaining the position that God is great, and like he still maintains the holiness of all of this. And his friends show up and are just like, oh, you must have done something wrong, right? You must have done something wrong, obviously, to be inflicted by all of this, right? Like you should be cursing what's happening to you, and obviously you must bear some of the blame. To which Job says, like, nah, man, like God's gonna do what God's gonna do. What am I supposed to do about it? Like, it's a force that's so much bigger than all of us and so much greater than all of us. What am I supposed to do about it, right? And if God wants to take all of my stuff away from me, then that's the will of God. Like that is what it is, and there's nothing to be done about it. Which runs completely counter to the prosperity gospel, right? That the prosperity gospel tells you that poor people are poor and should be denigrated because God has denigrated them, and rich people are rich because God loves them and has bestowed them with goodness because they're good people, they're better people. It's heresy. Like it's heresy across the board. And you don't even need to read the whole Bible, you just need to read the book of Job, right? And then I think my favorite part about the book of Job is that he finally rebuffs his friends. He maintains his his holiness in regards to his respect for God. God wins the bet with the devil, which, incidentally, there were no stakes. So God literally tortures Job for nothing, just for like the sake of being able to look at the devil and go, "Ha, I did it." And then the final chapter of the book is Job confronting God directly, and the two actually have a conversation. And Job says to God, what you've done to me is wrong, basically. And God's response is, listen to me, you little fucking pissant. If I want to crush your head and throw you into the dust, I will. I made all of this. You're worthless. Fuck you. And Job goes, you're right, God, you're right, my bad. And that's the end of the book. The Old Testament God was a fucking baller. Like, he was a badass. Like, he did not give a fuck about humans. Humans were just, like, completely disinterested. Like, he mainly, near as I can tell, the Old Testament God was mainly angry at humans most of the time. He was just mainly like, fuck these humans! They're so goddamn stupid! One of my favorite stories to tell in this regard, in this line. So Moses, right, brings the Jews into the desert. The whole Egyptian story, we all know that. Everybody knows the story of Moses leaving and the 10 plagues and all of that. Like, we all know that story. We don't know anything about what happens when they're in the desert, right? And so Moses goes to the top of the mountain to get the 10 commandments, right? And while he's on the top of the mountain, his people get tired. The Israelites get tired. And so they, like, erect a golden calf, start to party and, like, have, like, a whole thing. Like, they melt down all their gold, put up a golden calf so that they can worship the golden calf. Like, this whole thing. And then God says to Moses, oh, snap, dude. Like, do you see what's happening down there? I am going to wipe these Israelites out. I'm going to wipe them out. And then Moses goes, now, God, you cannot wipe the Jews out. If you do that, everyone will make fun of you and say how stupid you are for just bringing the Jews out here and then murdering them all. You cannot do that. And God goes, fine, Moses, you're right, but you better take care of this. And so Moses does. And it's like the only time I've found in the whole Old Testament where someone has talked God down. Which is why I think Moses is like this really high level prophet in the lore of Christianity. That it's like, yeah, he like looked into the face of God. God said, I'm going to fucking wipe these Jews out. And Moses was like, whoa. You cannot do that. And God actually went, that's a good point, human mortal. Instead of the thing he usually does, which is, what are you saying to me right now? Shut up. Like at the end of the story of Jonah, right? So God tells Jonah to go somewhere. Everybody knows about the belly of the whale stuff, but it's all contingent on this idea that Jonah has to go to a place and tell these guys to repent, or else God's going to wipe them out, right? So Jonah goes to the place eventually after getting out of the whale. He goes to the place and he tells all these guys, you better repent or God will wipe you out. And then they agree. And the king like wears sackcloth and like wails in the street, and the whole society like just throws down everything they were doing that they were doing that was wrong, that God was having a problem with, and they beg for forgiveness. And so God forgives them. And then Jonah gripes about it because Jonah's like, well, you should have wiped them out. And God just says to Jonah, shut up. Like, what do you know? And that's the end of the story. He does it a lot. Like, God is he is like, in the Old Testament, he's not, I mean, he's certainly like does malevolent things. Like, he's not seen as like good, right? He's not, but he's not seen as evil. Like, he's just a force. And if the force says that this is what happens, too fucking bad. Name a Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Confucius, pagan, or atheist state. I mean, the Holy Roman Empire? Does that count? Yeah, the prosperity preachers are the worst. They totally are. The Lord decreed at the destruction of the great temple of Solomon that the children of Abraham be cast forth as nomads, to not claim a home of our own till the Messiah returned, who would lead us. We have no right to Palestine at all. It is a sin. Religion has always been a tool of oppression. It is nothing but a means to justify your misery upon a mythical being instead of blaming your oppressors. That's really beautifully said, actually, Dave. That's really nice. I rather like that. Well, and also especially like something like the Torah, right? The Old Testament. Like, these books are usually written more to try to capture a history of a people, right? And any kind of law that exists within them is usually explicitly stated as law. And even more importantly than that, and this is why I look at a guy like Ben Shapiro and I just think he's a complete fraud. Like, he wears the yarmulke, he pretends like he's a Jew, but he's a total fraud because he has said things like there should be no empathy in politics, when Moses literally says that if you don't interpret the law with love, then the law is meaningless. So, like, the prophetic leader of his own religion has told him that he is wrong, and he is either illiterate, which is likely. It's very likely to me that Ben Shapiro has never read the Torah. And if he has, it was like when he was like a little kid so that he could say that he had done it. But like, he's clearly illiterate about his own religion. And then on top, so he's never read it, but also like, I genuinely think that if the Torah contradicted something that Ben Shapiro thought, he would just find a way to weasel out of it. Because that's who he is. He's just a weasel, right? Who wants to use religious documents as oppressive tools instead of interpreting them the way they're meant to be interpreted, which is as secular documents ultimately. Like, these documents don't tell us anything about God. They tell us everything about those people's opinions of God, right? Like, what do you think the opinion of a people who wrote the book of Job? Like, what do you think their opinion on God was? That God is just this force that will fuck you up if he wants. Straight up. Like, if God wants to fuck you up, he will, and you can't say anything about it. And in fact, if you turn around and curse God for doing so, you're the worse for it. Like, too bad. No, religion is a fascinating subject for me because right now, especially with the rise of the new atheists, have really put the conversation into two camps, which is people who are pro-religion but are illiterate, have never read the text, and choose not to understand it, and people who are against religion who are illiterate and choose not to understand it. And there's literally no one in the discourse standing up being like, hey, we should read this thing. Don't you think? Don't you think we should actually read this thing like the way that we read Harry Potter or the works of Shakespeare or, anything like the works of Dickens? Like, why am I supposed to take this book and be like, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ? And if I don't do that, I'm somehow missing something. Instead of taking the book and actually being like, okay, here's a book that came out of a period of time, written by specific people for a specific group of people. Let's read it and try to understand something about those people. And they're talking about like big God. It would be like watching the movie, like George Burns did a movie called Oh God, where he plays God. And God comes down and George Burns is God and he's talking to this kind of stuff. It'd be like watching that movie and insisting that like that's George Burns was actually God. It's like, no, you fucking moron. Like, no. The funny thing is all the good things that religion tries to teach humanity is what science shows is our true nature. It's our invalid environment that is the antagonist in the equation. If they truly follow the Torah, they would be living with Palestinians instead of killing them. That's exactly right, Ruth. That's exactly right. Yeah, the new atheists were not my heroes because I was an evangelical Christian, but they were responsible for sharpening my worldview, if you put it that way. That, like, even when I was young, I really viewed them as, like, the foil for me, and that they helped me get rid of my evangelicalism, but they have never been able to get rid of my theological worldview. And it's something that I'm pretty open about, and I try to be honest about. I do have a theological worldview. Like, we live in a superstructure. Even the scientists are saying that it's like quantum energy is what they call it, right? Isaac Newton defined God very cleanly, which Isaac Newton was a theologian, incidentally, if you didn't know, which is funny that that the new atheists would like venerate scientists and Enlightenment scientists like Isaac Newton, but would never acknowledge that Isaac Newton was a theologian and had written theological tracts that are available. You can find them. And in it, he defined what God would be, or and in that definition, he said God is the sum total of all things, right? Or if you want to put that in modern parlance, God is the quantum energy, right? And once you kind of make that understanding of what the theologians are actually talking about, then you can start to have a really interesting conversation. Like one of the most unfortunate questions that the new atheists really get stuck in, and that so did the theologians, so I don't want to put it completely on the new atheists, is that they would go into a debate and the conversation of the debate would be, does God exist, right? Which, as I've moved further and further away from that, I've come to realize is essentially a semantics argument in which both sides say nothing that is important and get lost in a circular conversation where one side thinks that God is being defined as a man who lives in the clouds, and the other side is, no, God is the sum total of all things, as defined by Isaac Newton, right? And that distinction would occasionally be directly made, like the Archbishop of Canterbury for the Archbishop of Canterbury for the Anglican Church had a conversation. What was his name? Rowan Williams, if I'm not mistaken. He had a conversation with Richard Dawkins, and he directly presented this as a statement of what God is, and Dawkins just literally couldn't respond to it, right? And his only statement was like, well, then, okay, if that's the truth, then what's the point of calling it God? And the point that I'm steadily driving to is that if we agree that what the theologians at least are talking about is the sum total of all things, or the quantum signature, then the question is not, does God exist, right? Because the quantum signature exists, right? Quantum energy exists. Here it is, right? We know. The question instead that's worth talking about, and I think it is a much better question to ask, is the quantum signature sentient or not? And that's something to really spend your time chewing on, right? Because then you can't get caught in a semantic argument, right? You accept that the quantum energy is around us. You accept that all things come from that quantum energy. You accept that quantum energy is the creation and the sum total of all things. So in theological terms, you've accepted the nature of God as we present it in all ways but one. Is the quantum energy sentient or not? That's the question that we need to be having. And that's the conversation I would love to hear from people who still consider themselves atheists, or people who, even agnostics, scientists, everybody. I'd love to have a conversation along those lines. You can't get caught in semantic arguments. Like, we all agree that the quantum signature is here. We all agree that this is all quantum energy. Is it sentient? My general position is that if we are to call ourselves sentient, right? Like if I am sentient, you are sentient, like everybody's sentient, well, then the system that generated that itself also should be sentient, right? The Greeks have a phrase, as above, so below. And that's more or less how I view it. It's very difficult for me to perceive that there would be a system so complex or so elegant that it would be able to create sentience without itself also being sentient. Yeah, I agree with that too, Ruth. There's something in your heart. It's up to each person to decide what it is. Well, because you come from quantum energy, right? Because you are a part of this quantum experience that we're all in, and that the quantum energy is part of who we are, like not even in our DNA, much deeper than that even. It's like down to the lowest possible level. Because of that, our spirit, if you like, that exists within us has so much more knowledge of what we are here to achieve or do or focus on than anything else, right? Than anything else. I like to say to people, like, everybody has inside of them a knowledge of what it is they are here to pursue, and that knowledge is fundamentally true and fundamentally unique to the individual, and and the individual is the only person who can know that. So if someone is saying to you, I want to do X, right? Like, I want to own an ice cream truck. Let's make it something like that. Like, all I want to do and all I can tell from the inside of me is I want to have an ice cream truck. I want to drive around and I want to sell people ice cream cones. And if I could give these ice cream cones away for free, I would. And that's what I want to do with all my time. And if that's what that person is saying, there's absolutely nothing that anyone can say in response. They know, and you don't. And it really is that simple. Yeah, that's something, Ruth, is man's nature for empathy and compassion. We are the most social creature on this planet. Except dolphins, Dave. You and I we're gonna disagree on this point, Dave. Dolphins are very social creatures, sir. Yeah, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. That's that Socrates sort of statement. It's a smart position to take. Yeah, it's the people who walk around pretending like they know something that end up looking like assholes. Believe me, I know. I was one of those people for a long time. I feel like if the quantum signature is sentient, then it's basically an eldritch being, and we'd be less significant to it than microbes are to us. So personally, I don't see the value in considering it. I think the value is in the considering of it. That's what's interesting about the conversation, is that the value isn't in the conclusion, right? The value is in the contemplation, right? That if you just make it as a conclusion and you just conclude it and then you close the book on it, then it's worthless, right? The value is actually in the consideration of it. And one of the things that I think I've come to see about, theologians would always talk about God as like this benevolent force, as this loving thing, which in the modern era has become interpreted, especially by the prosperity gospels, as like do good, get good, that kind of thing. But when you actually go back and read what these theologians were saying, they were saying, no, God is benevolent because it's better that something exists than nothing exists. And because something exists, then that something existing is itself like a benevolent. It's a good thing that anything is existing. And they would talk about God's like omnipotence. And that's where I start to be like, I don't think that God really knows what's going on. Like, maybe in like the big meta sense, in that like God can sort of step back and see all things and like all that kind of stuff. But like I don't think that God or the quantum signature or any of that kind of stuff like created all of this specifically to be like this, or created all of this with intent. Maybe that's the best way to say it, right? Because I have come to see it that like, because once you consider stuff like the multiverse, right? Like once you consider that kind of thing, I've just come to see like this force as a creative force that creates all things that are possible to be created simply as a byproduct of its own existence. And it's only after all things are created that such a being could turn around and even begin to investigate its creation and then ask certain questions like what is good or what is evil, because it didn't understand it when it was creating it. It just created it because it could, right? That's what it can do. It can create, and it creates anything that can be logically created. It just creates it as a byproduct of its own existence. And the process of us going through and talking to one another, and this is where I think the value really lies, Robin, is that if God is sentient, then our existence has built within it a learning process where God is attempting to learn about itself, and the only method that such a being would have to learn about itself is through the conversations and observations that it has with itself. That when I am talking to you, I am talking to you with the full force of God, and when you are talking to me, you are doing the same. And so we are two avatars of God communicating to one another, attempting to discover, what the fuck is this even? And I genuinely believe in the core of my being that the quantum energy, or God if you prefer, has no fucking idea why. That it's as clueless or lost as we are. And in a funny kind of way, I find that to be quite comforting. Right? I find it to be quite comforting, in fact, that the energy that created us is also kind of just like... Yep. Hi, Carrie. How you doing? Thanks for coming. Thanks for chiming in. Karma is an important subject discussed in Hinduism. Yeah. The Hindus are much closer to this than the Christians, in my view. Right? The Hindus have a much firmer grasp on what I would consider the nature of God. Yeah, and I know I have come to accept that my way of looking at that is unique, which I think is a big impetus for why I feel driven to do these sort of live streams, because I want what I'm saying, like, I don't want to spread this around because I want people to believe it, right? I'm not that interested in that. I don't want to make it like a little cult or something. That's weird. I just want those sorts of, I feel like I've got a lot of things that are like this, a lot of statements that are like this, where I have a different perspective, and I really want that perspective, and specifically, like, taking it back to this idea of God, I want these perspectives to become at least considered, and I want people to start being confronted with these perspectives, these ideas that, like, right now the only ideas that we're allowed to contemplate is God exists, knows everything, and if you don't agree with everything it says, then you're stupid and dumb and you're going to go to hell. Or God doesn't exist, and if you think that he does, you're stupid and a moron and wasting your time. That those are the only two positions you seem to be allowed to have in our society. And here I am standing up being like, I think it's extremely likely that God exists and that its creation of us was done simply as a byproduct of its own creation, and that it is as clueless about what to do about that than we are. Like, that we are all, in fact, fundamentally in this together. And that I do think that technically God is omnipotent, i.e. God does know everything, but I think that is only in a, that's like a truism, because God would be timeless, right? Such a being doesn't live in the time stream, but the only way that God could know anything is by going through the process of his own creation and directly experiencing all of the experiences of its own creation. And so its knowledge base can only be up to this point currently, right? As I am an avatar of it. And I can only learn about it from this perspective back through time, and I can't see into time because I am a linear being and I'm tied to this kind of chassis, right? And there's even this great theory that exists. I believe it was a Hindu that was walking around saying that not only are we a way for God to experience itself, as you just said, Max, how you doing, bud? Thanks for popping in. But we are, in fact, a way that God distracts itself from its own existence. That God will go and become an individual and lose this direct connection to its own divine existence as a form of vacationing. Right? Brandon, I fully realize that on mushrooms. Yeah, psychedelics can help with this, for sure. I generally default myself to the chakra system. I think the chakra system is a really good way of discussing, even if you look at it secularly. I don't need you to think that there are actual balls of energy inside of yourself or any of that. But just like a secular understanding of the energies of your own body and the energies of that. Yeah, chances are, based on our world now, very disappointed. Yeah, and I love this idea that, like, God will just, like, vacation inside of one of us, you know? And just, like, look down and be like, who is this Jeff Bezos? Let's live as Jeff Bezos for a while. And you, this way of thinking, though, can take you into very disturbing places, right? That, so, like, one of the uplifting things that I like to think about is this way of thinking fundamentally solves the problem of evil, right? It solves the problem of evil. Because the statement has always been, well, if God is benevolent and good, why does bad things happen to good people, right? Because if God allows bad things to happen to good people, then he's not really benevolent or good, right? Or any of this kind of stuff. And I've kind of taken a look at that and been like, no, you don't understand. God creates all things that are possible to be created as a byproduct of its own existence, right? Without judgment, without statements, because good and evil don't exist until they're created, right? and they are created as a byproduct of the existence of this force in the first place, right? And that if this creative force did not exist, right, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now. And so all of this exists not on purpose, right? Just literally like an inert force just went, and then everything that could be possible to be created was, simply by the existence of this being at all. And then only then can it turn around and go, what is this? What is this? What is this Holocaust that people are talking about, right? And then you realize, like, oh, okay. So let's say God found something in itself that it would go, that's no good. This is too much. The Holocaust is too much. We cannot bear this, right? Okay. How in the world, or how in all of existence, would God go about getting rid of that? Because even if he went back all through time and found the source of it and like cut it off and lifted it out of his own consciousness, right, and deleted it, he would have to delete it from his own memory, because when you think about it, such a force is simply imagination, right? Such a force is imagination itself, right? That he would have to delete it from its own memory, and then through the deleting of it from its own memory, it would immediately look and see, well, what's missing here? And it would be recreated instantaneously. And so you could have a situation where God is looking at a situation that is intolerable and wants to delete it, and then instantly deletes it and then recreates it immediately. So it's just like forever. And it knows that it's doing that. And so the only way for such a being to prevent such a thing from happening over the long term would be to see this thing, acknowledge that it's shit, and then try to get all of the beings that did this to not do it. So that in the future, as we go down, those beings just eliminate it, right? Instead of redoing it and recreating it and rebuilding it, right? And this actually can lead you into really horrible and horrific places, like horrific senses of realization, which is that I have said that God has created all things that are possible to be created simply as a byproduct of its own existence, and that includes hell. That there are definitely places that suck. There are definitely places that are significantly worse than this, structurally, that are built into the DNA of the place, are absolute demonic horror shows. Those places exist. God has been there. I don't think I'll talk much longer about that. And moreover than that, God has been there and there's nothing that it can do about it. That it exists. Because it has to. Because it can. That's it. And once you accept like the multiverse theory, right? Once you accept like that there is a universe directly beside this universe, right? That in all ways is exactly the same as this universe, except in that universe over, I say the word 5 here instead of the word 4. Right? And that's it. And that every universe beside that one distinction that exists, right, will be exactly the same and will carry on exactly the same until it doesn't. Maybe there is a universe where I say the word 5 instead of 4, or 10 instead of 6, or anything, any distinction there, where that fundamental change does create an alteration. Maybe tomorrow one of you will write down a number to buy a lottery ticket, and then you'll think of the number that I just said there. And so in some universes you're like 1, some 2, 3, 4, And then finally, there's one that's 9, and 9's the right one, and that connects in, and so that person wins the lottery. But to get to that distinct point where there's actually a divergence, you have to have 8 other universes that are fundamentally exactly the same except that one distinction. And whenever I hear anybody talk about the multiverse theory, they don't talk about it that way. Everybody's like, there's a universe where Hitler died, right? They have these like big grand narratives. And my thing about the whole idea of the multiverse is like, no. Not only does this universe exist, there's right beside it a universe that is exactly the same, where you exist exactly in the same way, except one person in that universe did one thing differently, and it was completely inconsequential and didn't matter. And it goes down and goes down until it did matter, right? And then there's an infinite array of those within that as well, right? And so when we start talking about the multiverse theory, I'm a lot more like, so like Rick and Morty is a great example of this. I love that they've gone into multi-dimensions with Rick and Morty, but like their perception of like the multi-dimension is like that, oh, there's only like so many of these, and I'm literally like, no, dude, there's like more than you could ever even begin to contemplate, with differences that are so minute they would be completely indistinguishable. You would never know. Theo, gonna take us, hi, how you doing, Theo? Thanks for popping in. Gonna get us off religion, probably for the best. I could go on religion for a long time, guys. It seems like Friday is turning to my religion day. Just curious, what is the difference between Socialist Action Party and the Canadian Communist Party? The Canadian Communist Party has been bought by the capitalists. That's if anybody wants to present me with anything that says anything other than that, you go ahead. Every interaction I've had with them, every conversation I've had, and everything I've focused on with the Canadian Communist Party is that they have been bought by capitalists in order to suppress the Canadian Communist Party, so that the actual communists can't use the name in order to run a party. Because the Canadian Communist Party doesn't organize, it doesn't have anybody kind of talking in it. There's no real base. I've tried to contact them, they never get back to me. They will run somebody on the ballot and then nobody shows up to the debate or anything, right? So in my view, it's just been completely co-opted by capitalists and it doesn't exist. So it's just a dead end. And then the Socialist Action, now I don't know anything about a Socialist Action Party, but are you talking about Socialist Action like the link that I have and I talk about that's in my description? Because Socialist Action is an organization that is working within the NDP, and everybody should get involved in Socialist Action, I think, because their goal is to take over the NDP. And while they're going along that way of trying to take over the NDP, they are working to push the NDP further to the left and to adopt leftist policies and socialist ideas. So I think everybody should get involved in the Socialist Action Party. I've met the people who are running it. I know what they're up to. I know what they do. I report on what they do occasionally on my channel. Don't send $5 to the NDP. The NDP will take that money, pat you on the head, and then ignore you. Give your money to Socialist Action, because they'll actually do what the NDP should do, which is move the party to the left. Because the NDP will just take your money, dump it in a box, pat you on the head, and say, "Okay, individual person who represents one vote at best, we really don't care what you think, because we're busy negotiating with an organization that shows up with 500 people." Like, that's what we're going to listen to. We're going to listen to an organization that's coming in blocks, right? And if that organization can get big enough so that when they show up, instead of it being 500 people, it's 1,000 people or 10,000 people, then they can take that party over, right? Because fundamentally, and this is something that nobody wants you to actually like realize in fundamental ways, politics is a numbers game. That if you can organize people and show up with 1,000 people and your opponent shows up with 100 people, you win, right? Conversation's over. They can do as much like fussing and fitzing that they want to do, and they do, right? But that fussing and fitzing only works if the numbers are like this, right? If they can make it so that they can go and win, or make it so that you go and lose, right? They'll futz. Yeah, they'll mess around as best they can. But if they show up with this and you show up with this, game's over. It's just over. And so people should give their money to the Socialist Action movement. And then when they call for you to show up for events, you should show up. Because that's how this thing actually happens, right? That when politicians see an event where 100,000 people show up, they pay attention. Like the climate change conversation that happened here in Canada, right? So we were basically being bullshitted the whole time, especially under the Harper years, right? Justin Trudeau gets in and basically bullshits all of us, right? Like, oh yeah, we care about climate change. We're not going to do anything about it, but oh yeah, we care about it. And then a climate change rally happens here in Toronto, as well as at the same time one, I believe it was in Vancouver, and like 100,000 people came, right? Well, that completely changed the discourse. Like, the Liberals declared it a climate emergency right after that. Because they fundamentally understand that if 100,000 people are going to show up about this issue, if you turn around and do nothing about it, well, that's 100,000 people that's not going to vote for you. And politics is a numbers game, right? And politicians try to play the game where they want to sway as many numbers to their side while doing as little as possible. And traditionally, so if you scare them from the right with this group of fascists called conservatives, while simultaneously offering them platitudes from a pretty face, right? Well, people will vote for you and say, well, at least they're not conservative. And that's good enough. And that's essentially Canadian politics for the last 150 years, right? And so the hope is that we can get to a point where the conservatives weaken themselves so much, and they have weakened themselves, let's be really clear about that. Canadians do not want to vote for fascists. And the Liberals will also simultaneously weaken themselves because they're essentially conservatives. And Canadians don't really want to vote for conservatives either. And both of those groups will weaken themselves at the same time, while an upswell in the NDP will sweep them away. And which is possible. It's completely possible that happens. We've seen that throughout Europe. It happens. I think it's more likely, because this also has a historical trend in Canada, that there will be another like orange wave that happens under Jagmeet Singh, where large groups of the populace will suddenly swing towards the NDP, but it won't be enough for them to seize power, but it'll scare the shit out of the Liberals to the point where the Liberals will start making secessions, will start ceding power. Which is what Liberals do. That's the role of Liberals in the political structure. That Liberals exist to protect capital, and one of the ways that they protect capital is by throwing crumbs at the populace when the populace becomes too dissatisfied with them. I have considered the possibility that there are many experiments going on. Oh, yeah. For humans to think we are all there is in the galaxy is very vain and egotistical. Yeah, and for most of human history, we've put ourselves in the middle, right? That was Galileo's... Was it Galileo? No, Copernicus. That was his big... that's why he was so That's why he affronted the Catholics so much. Because he discovered something that took humans out of the center of the universe, that we were no longer the center of the universe. That was what was essentially why he was so antagonistic to the religious structure of the day. Yeah, the Tool will help with that, and Ford well. I'm a bit worried about O'Toole, actually. O'Toole's going to put forth, he's going to do a really good campaign. His campaign is going to look really, really good. Like, he's looking good. He's lost a whole lot of weight. When he speaks, he sounds very statesman-like. He's former military. He is going to look good. He's not going to come out like Andrew Scheer and kind of look like a little weasel, right? Like, Andrew Scheer kind of just looked like a little weasel, and we all looked at him and were like, I don't want that guy to be my leader. Fuck you. But O'Toole is going to come out, and he is going to look good. He's going to look the part. He's going to talk a game. It just comes down to whether or not Canadians are by and large fed up with the Conservative Party itself. Like, O'Toole might look good, but he's carrying around this gigantic anchor, which is his own base, right? No, of course you shouldn't trust him. Like, you shouldn't trust him. But I'm just saying that he's going to look good. And my perception of it is that Canadians, by and large, are looking at the Conservative Party as, like, their base, the people themselves, and they're seeing, like, QAnoners and fascists and Nazis and climate change denialists. You know, like, there's a lot of, and even if a lot of that is just perception, that really does count. So I think that O'Toole will essentially get tanked by his own party, and that Justin Trudeau will probably actually gain numbers from the Conservatives, because Justin Trudeau is a right-winger himself, right? The Liberal Party is a right-wing party, and a lot of Conservatives, I think, are looking at the Liberals now and looking at their own party. Like, if you're a Conservative who doesn't deny the existence of climate change, right? Like, if you were one of the, like, 48% that actually voted for the bill that said climate change is real, right? In the Conservative caucus. Well, you're kind of looking at the Liberals and you're being like, well, those guys are essentially Conservatives. These guys are looking nutty. Maybe I'll jump ship. And that's what I expect to see. I expect to see the Conservatives lose people to the Liberals in this next election. While simultaneously, I expect to see Liberals lose people to the NDP. Because I think that there are a lot of people who are in the Liberal Party and a lot of people who got behind Justin Trudeau believing that he was actually a progressive. And because he presented himself as a progressive, he lied to everybody and said he was going to do a lot of progressive stuff. And he's really revealed himself to be a pretty hardline right-winger. Like, that's his administration has done more for the oil industry than Stephen Harper's administration did. So Justin Trudeau's farther to the right on that issue. Justin Trudeau has put in less social welfare policy than Stephen Harper did, so he's farther to the right on that issue. And you find as you go down the list with Justin Trudeau that almost on every single issue he's further to the right than Stephen Harper. And I think that's just largely because Justin Trudeau is just a pretty face who reads cue cards. He doesn't really come up with ideas. He doesn't really make any, like, he doesn't write law. Like, he's not doing any of that. He's just reading cue cards. And so the party itself has gone further to the right because that's where corporate power wants them to go. And so there's a lot of Liberal voters, I think, who are seeing that trajectory and going, that's not what I was hoping would happen in this Liberal Party. And they'll jump ship over to the NDP. So the question is, will more people go from Conservative to Liberal than will go from Liberal to NDP? We'll see. My prediction, if I was a betting man, we'll see another Liberal minority. That's what'll happen. Yeah, he clicks well with immigrants. Liberal, and a pretty big Liberal strategy is to connect with immigrants, right? And to get more immigrants in, especially because, like, typically what immigrants seem to care about, and I don't really like to talk about immigration or immigrants or any of that kind of stuff because I feel like it gets into dicey territory talking about this kind of stuff. But really it does seem to be that they are, Like, if you're immigrating to Canada, you're just happy that you are immigrating to Canada. You don't really know what's going on politically in Canada. You don't really know who these parties are. All you know is this party is responsible for me being able to sort of rebuild a life in a world that doesn't get bombed on by Canada. Jeff, which new bill are you talking about, dude? QAnon is morphing. Some are discovering higher political discussions for the first time. Yep. QAnon is a fascinating force because it is... I highly recommend everybody watch the HBO documentary QAnon Into the Storm. It was a fellow who was embedded in the QAnon movement from the outset, from the very beginning. He literally showed up to Republican rallies and saw people holding Qs, like the letter Q, and was immediately like, "Hi, what's that?" And so people would start to talk about oh, there's this message board where there's this guy who calls himself Q, who is embedded in the White House, although he's never identified himself, who is releasing secrets into the public. And he heard that narrative, and he immediately was like, "Who is Q?" And nobody knew. And so he starts this large-scale investigation from the beginning of the movement into who is Q to discover the identity, which he successfully unveils. And it's a phenomenal story, a fascinating story that really reveals someone I would consider a modern-day supervillain. I think there's just no other way to describe it. It's like a modern-day supervillain. That if that character existed in a comic book, you would read it and be like, wow, Superman's got his hands full. And it doesn't surprise me that, because that's how it goes. I discovered higher political discussions for the first time because of 9/11, right? And I became a big-time 9/11 truther. I spent a lot of my time talking about 9/11 to the chagrin of everyone around me. And of course, eventually I dismiss this. I discard the 9/11 trutherism eventually. Because of Noam Chomsky. Because Noam Chomsky said, well, let's say we could prove it. Let's say it was true, right? Let's say we found the smoking gun. Bush did 9/11. He did it. We know. So? Bush is guilty of high-level war crimes that he did in public on the record in front of us. He's not in jail, right? There are things that are provable, that we know he did, that he's not in jail for. Why do you think this would be different? And that was immediately a moment where I was like, huh. And I just realized that the whole discussion surrounding 9/11 was completely pointless. It's fun, and I like to dive into it, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff there, in my perspective, but it is fundamentally futile. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if we find out that Bush did 9/11. Yeah, Bush did Iraq. He's not in jail for that. I don't know why anyone would think he would be in jail if we suddenly found out he did 9/11. And so, for me, when I hear something like QAnon is morphing and some are discovering higher political discussions for the first time, I think about my own political journey and my own discovery of politics and my own sort of growing and learning. And some of these QAnon people, dude, are going to end up like I have, which is as the voice of communism in Canada. But just as having a better understanding of the political structure, and that just because their inception into politics started in this kind of kooky conservative way, or kooky conspiratorial way, I should say, doesn't mean they'll stay there. And in fact, I would believe that people who got conned so thoroughly by such a grift would be far more skeptical of that in the future, as I am. It's as they say, right? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, I ain't gonna get fooled again. snowing today. This is bullshit. That's right, Lucy. You tell the world. Spending my closely monitored 5-minute smoke break in the corporate depression booth while working for the richest man on the planet. That's wellness, baby. Yeah, this Amazon booth. If you haven't heard of this, so Amazon is doing what they're calling Amazon booths so that people can take 10-minute break when they take their break, right? Their 10, 15-minute break that they get. They go into one of these booths, right? And instead of the booth being like serene or peaceful, they like bombard you with Amazon propaganda. And it's all couched to be like, oh, a Zen spiritual experience, but it's fucking propaganda. And it's some dark dystopian shit is what it is. And you wait, man. Here's one thing I think about all the time. Like, humans can be hypnotized, right? Now, when I say this, a lot of people kind of just slough it off and kind of go like, oh. Like, we've all seen those shows where there's a dude who, like, hypnotizes people, right? And then everybody kind of walks away from it and kind of forgets that that's the truth. That humans can be hypnotized, right? If you know how to do it, and if you know how to get a person to consent to being hypnotized, that's the linchpin, right? A person cannot be hypnotized unless they consent to being hypnotized. That's actually one of the most fascinating things about hypnosis. That to hypnotize a person, they have to consent to it. So spend 15 minutes in our Amazon booth. Okay. Yeah, let's see what this is all about. I'll sit here. Please look at the light. 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 You can be hypnotized. There was this hypnotist who actually put up a video game booth in a pub, right? He put a video game booth up in a pub, and it was one of these classics, I've got a gun, you shoot the screen kind of thing, right? And the game is just like zombies, okay? And a guy went and stood in front of it and started playing the game, and then the hypnotist hit a button, and a series of lights flashed in this guy's eyes, and he went out because he was hypnotized. And then they took him while he was in this state of hypnosis, and they put him in a space that was actually a factory, and then they'd hired a bunch of actors where they pretended to be zombies, and this guy's gun got replaced with a gun that actually did shoot something, like little pellets, right? And so the guy believed that he was in a factory hunting zombies, and then he ends up in a space isolated while the zombies are doing their zombie thing, and then this hypnotist comes and rescues him, puts him out again with hypnosis because he knows how to do it, and then they put him back in the pub in front of the zombie game, and now the zombie game is saying game over, and then they wake the guy up, and he was like, wow, that game was great. People can be hypnotized, okay? And anybody who wants to tell me that major, massive conglomerate corporations are not doing everything they can to hypnotize people, welcome to the Amazon booth. Sit down, look at the light, calm yourself, relax yourself. You are the perfect Amazon worker. Amazon loves you. Amazon is working as hard as it can to protect you. You love Amazon. You'll do anything for Amazon. Your 15-minute break is over. And you're back. That's what this is. Like, what is this but that? Like, it's not for spirituality. It's not for like a Zen kind of anything. It's to hypnotize people. Like, and to think that these corporations are not attempting to hypnotize people, I think is a joke. They're obviously going to do that. Like, they're obviously going to do that. And the most dangerous people to these capitalists are the people who are walking around who know people can be hypnotized and then who can see what's going on with the hypnosis. Yep, the Daily Cheer is a cult thing, and they know it is. That's in the material. You can find it. They know that it's a cult thing, and it's specifically to engender this kind of behavior that I'm talking about. They know what they're doing with that. They want to hypnotize people. They want to make it so that this culture is not only normalized, but also considered a good thing, right? So that when you actually wake up from the hypnosis and wake up from the stupid cultish behavior and you look around yourself and you go, oh, this is a dystopian hellscape, it's too late. That if you do manage to wake up and realize like that's what's happening and start acting in such a way, Amazon will just take you and get rid of you. And everybody will go like, oh, what happened to Bill? And they'll be like, and they'll just keep working. People need to learn a trade, man versus material. Well, and honestly, people need to acknowledge that there are trades that aren't just pull a winch, right? Like things like plumbing, carpentry, electrical, right? Everybody acknowledges that those are trades, right? And that are good and should be done. Is what I am doing a trade? I think it is, but I'm yet to find a person who goes along with that narrative, right? Especially because, like, there's no union, you can't get paid for it, right? But, like, seeing the world, articulating what you're seeing, interpreting what you're seeing, right? Especially if it counters the mainstream narrative, right? Yeah, fuck yeah, that's a trade. It used to be called journalism, but that doesn't really exist anymore. But if you try to convince somebody who spends their life like turning a wrench that what I'm doing has value and is actually good, get out of here, learn a trade, get a real job. Yeah, same in Zeller's, Home Depot. Walmart's never have windows. Yeah, it's so that you don't know, you can't tell that the passage of time is happening. That's the same with like casinos. Yeah, the arts are a trade. Thanks, Jeff. Once skilled trades die, there will be a major problem. I actually genuinely believe that it is like built in us to build stuff. That the people who want to be building stuff are doing it to the best that they can in this in this capitalist system, right? That they're not, that as I said before, like everybody has inside of them this desire to pursue something or do something. And I said like a guy running an ice cream truck, just to kind of show how serious I am about that idea and how much we should respect that idea. And so there are definitely people who are like, I want to build a skyscraper. I want to build that. Like, what a great legacy. What a great thing to leave behind, building a skyscraper, right? I want to work with electricity. When you actually think about what an electrician is doing, it's actually quite mystical. There's like a really mystical quality to it, that all they would have to do is show up in like a robe with like a thing and be like, I am going to work with the current, right? And they like lay wire and all this, and then like they flip a switch and magic occurs as far as anybody is concerned, right? Like, let there be light, switch, light, you know? and there's this really interesting world I'd love to pay attention to because funny things exist in it called Warhammer, right? There's Warhammer Fantasy and then there's Warhammer 40K, which is like fantasy future. It's like sci-fi fantasy. And in that world, there's tech wizards, right? Which are engineers. They know how to fix the ships. But they don't tell anyone. They keep that information to themselves, so no one actually knows how it works. And then they've created a cult around it and a mysticism around it so that everyone thinks that what they're doing is magic. But the big secret, and you learn this as you go deeper and deeper into the cult of the tech wizards, is that it isn't magic. It's engineering that they just keep secret. I find that to be rather funny. Yeah. That universe also, another, like, so we're talking about hypnosis, right? Another thing that's really fascinating about humans is oh shoot, the placebo effect. There it is. The placebo effect, right? That a person can affect their health and their own inner state simply by believing that they have done something about it, right? So I remember I was very young. I was like 12, and I watched this documentary where they talked about the placebo effect, where, okay, so we give this guy a sugar tablet, and then we give this guy an actual medicine, and if this guy feels better and this guy doesn't, then the medicine works. But if this guy doesn't feel better and this guy does feel better, it's because of the placebo effect. And I immediately like put my hand up and I'm like, what's this placebo effect that you're talking about? And literally the scientists would say like, oh, they just believe it works, so it does. And I was like, what? Can we talk more about that? And the scientists would be like, no, we're not interested in that. We're trying to find a medicine. And then they would go off and try to talk about this medicine and the whole time I'm like, so we can heal ourselves if we believe it. And they'd be like, yes, that's the placebo effect, moving on. And I'm just like, hold the fucking phone. Why are we just moving past the placebo effect? We're literally acknowledging its existence. We're acknowledging the existence that a human being can fundamentally alter themselves in real and tangible ways, and they can do it because they believe that something that they have taken will have that effect, therefore it does. Shouldn't we be talking about that every fucking day? Don't you think we should be talking about that a lot? Don't you think we should be talking about, like, literally human beings can alter their own state because they believe it? Like, don't we think that should be, like, high topic of conversation constantly, all the time? Like, and not in this, like, capitalist, we need to find a medicine to sell to people kind of way, but in a, like, but in a, like, genuine, like, here's a mystical quality that humans have that the scientific community has completely acknowledged. No, we're not going to talk about it. Yeah, MK Ultra. I'm learning more and more about MK Ultra. That's a big, big topic. I recently watched a speech given by somebody who wrote a book about Operation Paperclip, which is the operation that the United States government embarked on to post-World War II. They took a bunch of Nazis, including Nazis that had been imprisoned in The Hague after they hung a bunch of Nazis. And they took those Nazis, so like not like eugenicists, torturers, right? Like people who had created sarin gas, that kind of stuff, and not in U.S., Canada as well. And they took them and basically turned them into government officials, right? And many of them high ranking, like. I've heard kind of pro-CIA propaganda talking about MK Ultra as if it was like, oh no, but we took them just for their expertise, and that they were not like important decision-making people. But when you actually take a look at the information, they like took a Nazi eugenicist and made him the head of his own department, that kind of thing. And like now MK Ultra, I'm forgetting just now what the like linchpin of that is. That's primarily a drug-based thing, right? That's the one where they like did LSD experiments on people, on like soldiers and stuff. Is that the one? Anyway. You know what? Forget that. I have the internet. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Brainwashing, psychological torture, yeah. Yeah, man, the CIA. Why are we... Hypnosis. They've been doing it all along. You love Amazon. You love Amazon. Right. And we've known it since 1975. Like, the idea... Like, this is what's wild to me about MK Ultra, is that we learned about it in 1975, and the CIA still exists. Like, even after, like, Richard Helms ordered that MK Ultra files be destroyed. Like, how did this not bring down the CIA? Right? How is this kind of thing not absolutely... Like, I mean, anybody... It's stuff like this is the reason why, if I find out that the source of information has any connection to the CIA whatsoever, that I immediately discredit that source. And I'm very upfront about that. Like, if they have worked for Radio Free Asia, if they work in any of the CIA's, like, democratic, like, spreading of information kind of stuff, if I find out that they've worked in those institutions, right, and they're coming out with this source, I'm like, nope, CIA, MK Ultra, liars, bye. And it discredits the source completely. I don't trust the CIA. I don't listen to the CIA. If the CIA is sending information into the world, I assume that it's false from the outset. And like, just think there's this institution that exists in the United States called the CIA that exists to lie to you and do this kind of fucking shit. And, like, the torture program came out of the CIA, right? Like, remember through the Bush years when people like Sam Harris were defending torture? And we were all supposed to just, like, go along with that and take that shit seriously? And the CIA is still around. Was on civilians, someone went in with a sore leg, bam. I don't know what you mean, DJ. Yeah, just a friggin'... The U.S. General Accounting Office issued a report which stated that between those dates... working with the CIA, the Department of Defense gave hallucinated drugs to thousands of volunteer soldiers in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, and the sad thing about this is that, like, a lot of these guys come back from places like Vietnam and, like, all this after getting fucked up by this shit, and start, like, talking about it, and everybody thinks they've just lost their minds, and they get isolated, right? You can see that in American media. They just totally abandoned them. Yeah, exactly. Washington Post is CIA controlled. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. He has a multi-billion-dollar contract with the CIA. And what's actually interesting about that relationship, Jeff, is that the CIA is obviously embarking on a large-scale psyop to control controlled dissent, right? Which is the idea that once the cat's out of the bag... Once you've lost the argument, right? Like, once you've lost the information war, you can no longer stand against it and pretend as though it's, as if it hasn't been lost, because then you just continue to lose. The best that you can do is acknowledge what the truth is, and what everybody sees is the truth, and then try to control the dissent, right? Try to control, so that instead of people descending and landing on get rid of the CIA, it descends and it goes somewhere else. And they don't care where it goes, as long as it doesn't go get rid of the CIA. And you have an Amazon Echo, you named it CIA, that's so funny. And one of the ways that clearly Amazon and the CIA have agreed on to how to do this is Amazon keeps releasing movies that are anti-CIA propaganda, right? Or appear to be anti-CIA propaganda. They'll tell a story about a young woman that the CIA hounded and drove insane. There was this young actress who got involved with the Black Panther Party, and because of her involvement, the girl from the woman from Twilight, whatever her name is, Kirsten something or other, she played this young lady in this movie, where she was the, you know what, man, I'm gonna do better than this. Twilight cast woman. So Kristen Stewart. Kristen Stewart, IMDb. Kristen Stewart. Yeah, John Krasinski is 100%. John Krasinski is he's like got an America's Sweetheart kind of perspective, but that guy is a cynical actor, man. Like that guy. What was the name? Heck, I cannot remember the name of this. Kristen. It's gonna drive me crazy unless I do this. So Kristen, CIA movie. American Ultra. No, that's not it either. No. Kristen Stewart, Black Panther, maybe. Black Panther. No big surprise. It's hard to find this movie. Yeah, this is it. Seberg. Seberg is a 2019 political thriller film directed by Benedict Andrews from a screenplay, blah, blah, blah. It stars those people. Plot. Doink. A famous American actress known for playing the female lead in the film Breathless. Open marriage with Roman Gary. She's raising a child. She prepares to leave on a trip to Hollywood to promote her career. She witnesses a black activist causing a scene, insisting on sitting wherever he wants on the plane. Seberg appears to be attracted to the passenger. They start a sexual relationship. He's a Black Panther. Notice the small protest. Unbeknownst to her, the FBI are undercover. Oh, is this actually about the FBI, not the CIA? Oh, that's hilarious. Finally, it's about the FBI destroying her. So it's the CIA working against the FBI. Oh, my bad. That makes it so much funnier. So let me talk about this John Krasinski thing, because Cody Johnson from Cody Johnson who does the Some More News show on YouTube. He did a whole thing about John Krasinski, and John Krasinski created a show called something like Good News Today or something like this, which is basically just like a shitty news show that does good stories, right? And he pretended as though that it was just him doing it from like his living room with like a YouTube channel, but there was actually like a whole industry behind him that created this show so that they could package it and sell it off to somebody. And it was like one of the most cynical things I think I've ever seen anybody do. And John Krasinski, he does all of he's the new he's the new Tom Clancy guy, right? Any Tom Clancy thing they do, they get John Krasinski. So he's super embedded in all that. Anyway. The Fifth Estate did a thing on MK Ultra. Yeah, everybody should know about MK Ultra. The CIA should not exist. Like, it's an organization that shouldn't exist. Like, you literally have a institution in your society that is designed to lie to you. That's the reason it exists. Celebrity won't give out private info. No problem. We'll snag it anyway. Oh, that's creepy. Cruella is such a weird film to me, dude. Like, we need an origin story for the psychopath that tried to murder a bunch of dogs. Why? Am I supposed to empathize with this fucking psychopath? Am I supposed to walk out of the movie theater being like, you know, that woman who attempted to murder a whole bunch of dogs and make a code out of them, she wasn't so bad, right? Yeah, Jack Ryan, that's right. Like, I don't know. Just kind of it's a messed up world that we're living in, guys. There's 10 of you here. I'm going to close down this stream pretty shortly. 3 minutes on the clock. I'm having a good one today, though. I thought today was going to be kind of a grinder, but honestly, I feel like Friday is turning into, like, the existential spiritual day. I always end up having the most existential, like, spiritual discussions on Friday. And I think I'm going to start making it more concrete. I'm going to start making that more official. That if you come in on Mondays, I think Monday is going to be like a show day where I just show something and then we can talk about the show. And tune in next Monday. I've got something really good. You're going to dig it. It's a great lecture given by a fellow who really lays out how the transition from fossil fuels to electric is going to happen very quickly. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, we probably already would have gone through it, honestly. And his speech is it gives a lot of hope in the fossil fuel discussion. So tune in on Monday, and I'll show that, and then we'll have a great discussion afterwards. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are kind of free form at this point. Nothing seems to be materializing. But Fridays, I think Fridays are going to become more and more, and on purpose, more and more about spirituality and existentialism, philosophy, instead of focusing on the news. Unless, and I got to be straightforward about this, unless there's something huge that's going on. I always do want to be talking about the Israel-Gaza situation. You can tell that nothing really is going on because they're talking about, like, very specific issues. Like, they're talking about the Belarus leader support. You know, they're not really talking about. Anyway, we'll see. That's the plan. Okay, this is going to be the end of this video, guys. As always, you are all doing really wonderfully out there. If you're here and you're listening to that and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, like, share, do all those things, hit all the buttons, hit all the bells, hit all the whistles. My Patreon, always a good time to remind people to give me money. Give me money. I need the money for the capitalism. I hope one day I can actually end one of these without having to pitch capitalism. That's the dream. And again, you are a divine being living in divine energy. We could use some of it right now. These capitalists spend billions of dollars to try and convince you that you are less than that you are less than what you are, which is that divine being. You speak and move around and see with the eyes of God. And I think that that's just true. All right. Good luck. We're going to need it.